Scott Douglas made a mistake that Tuesday morning. He came home early. The Manhattan to London flight had been delayed, his meeting postponed, and for the first time in 18 months, the billionaire CEO walked through his front door at 9:47 a.m. instead of his usual 8:00 p.m. The house was supposed to be quiet. It was always quiet. But as Scott set down his briefcase in the foyer, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Laughter. Children's laughter. High-pitched, delighted, echoing through the marble halls like something from a dream or a nightmare. His children didn't laugh. His children didn't make sounds at all. Scott followed the noise, his heart pounding, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Had someone broken in? Was something wrong? Were the twins? He stopped dead in the living room doorway. Emma and Jacob, his silent, immobile twins, were moving, walking, no, running, toddling across the Persian rug with unsteady, determined steps, their faces lit with joy he'd never seen before. And kneeling before them, arms outstretched, tears streaming down her face, was Vanessa Patel, their maid, wearing blue cleaning gloves, still clutching a dustcloth, whispering words that detonated in Scott's chest. "Come to Mama, babies, that's it. Come to Mama." The twins crashed into her arms, and Scott realized he'd been absent for the most important moment of his children's lives. How long had this been happening? How long had he been blind? What Scott witnessed that morning was impossible. Medical science said it couldn't happen. 5 specialists had prepared him for a lifetime of silence. But in 6 months, a woman with no credentials and no permission had unlocked something everyone else, including Scott himself, had given up on. To understand how, we have to go back. Back to the beginning. Back to the day Vanessa Patel walked into a mansion that had become a graveyard. Before we begin, like and click the subscribe button and tell me where you are watching from in the comment. Your support helps us bring more amazing stories you won't want to miss. The Douglas Mansion was a monument to everything money could buy, and nothing it couldn't. $42 million of imported Italian marble, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline, a nursery filled with the finest developmental toys that sat untouched, gathering dust like museum pieces. Every footstep echoed. Every door closed like a gunshot. Every room felt like a mausoleum. Scott Douglas had built his fortune in tech and finance by age 33. Forbes called him the boy wonder of Wall Street. Business Insider featured his penthouse as where innovation sleeps. He'd negotiated billion-dollar mergers in 3 languages and never lost. But 18 months ago, Scott lost the only thing that mattered. Sarah Douglas died in childbirth, delivering the twins who would carry her name but never know her voice. Hemorrhage, complications, a cascade of medical failures that no amount of money or power or screaming could reverse. The twins survived. Sarah didn't, and Scott, whether he admitted it or not, blamed them. He couldn't look at Emma without seeing Sarah's eyes staring back. Couldn't hold Jacob without remembering the last time he'd held his wife. So, he stopped trying. He buried himself in boardrooms and spreadsheets, letting a parade of nannies raise the children he couldn't bear to love. 5 nannies in 14 months. Each one came with impeccable credentials. Each one left with the same diagnosis. Mr. Douglas, the twins aren't responding to any stimulation. They don't track movement. They don't babble. They don't even try. I think you need specialists, not a nanny. The specialists came next. Pediatric neurologists, developmental therapists, child psychologists with Harvard degrees, and Madison Avenue offices. They used words like delayed attachment, trauma response, and failure to thrive in neglectful environments. Scott threw money at the problem. Custom therapy programs, sensory equipment, a nurse on call 24 hours a day. Nothing changed. The twins remained locked in silence. The mansion grew colder, and Scott convinced himself that some things, some people, were simply broken beyond repair. Then came Vanessa Patel, 27 years old, no degree from Columbia or NYU, no letters after her name, just a resume filled with volunteer work at Queens community centers, childcare experience helping raise her 3 younger siblings after her parents divorced, and a reference letter from a church that praised her extraordinary capacity for empathy. Scott almost threw her application in the trash, but his assistant had begged him to interview just one more person. "She's different," Maria had insisted. She actually asked about the children first, not the salary. When Vanessa walked into the mansion for her interview, she didn't gasp at the opulence. Didn't comment on the chandeliers, or the view, or the Steinway piano collecting dust in Sarah's old music room. She looked around at the expensive silence and saw exactly what it was: a tomb for the living. "Where are Emma and Jacob?" she asked softly, before Scott could even begin his practice speech about schedules and expectations. He gestured vaguely toward the nursery upstairs. "The day nurse has them." Vanessa had smiled, a sad, knowing smile that made Scott inexplicably uncomfortable. "With respect, Mr. Douglas, I'd like to meet the children before we discuss logistics, if that's all right." No one had ever asked to meet the twins first. Scott found himself following her up the marble staircase, watching this stranger from Queens kneel on the nursery floor between Emma and Jacob, who sat motionless in their play yard, staring at nothing. "Hi, sweet babies," Vanessa whispered, not reaching for them, just sitting close. "My name is Vanessa. I'm going to be spending time with you, if that's okay. We're going to have so much fun together." The twins didn't respond, didn't even blink. Scott waited for Vanessa's face to fall, for the familiar disappointment to settle in. Instead, she'd turned to him with absolute certainty in her eyes and said, "These children aren't broken, Mr. Douglas. They're just waiting for someone to show them it's safe to come back." He'd hired her on the spot, partly out of desperation, partly because something in her voice reminded him of Sarah, who'd always believed that love was the answer to everything. Scott had stopped believing that the day Sarah died. But as Vanessa stood and made a silent promise to the 2 silent children, a promise Scott couldn't hear, but somehow felt, the mansion seemed to exhale for the first time in 18 months. What Scott didn't know was that Vanessa Patel was about to break every rule he'd carefully constructed. She would dismantle his schedules, defy his orders, and teach his children something no amount of money could buy. She would teach them that they were loved. And in the process, she would teach Scott Douglas something he'd forgotten: that miracles don't happen on timelines. They happen when someone cares enough to stay. 6 months earlier, the Douglas mansion woke the same way it had for the past 18 months, cold, silent, and precisely on schedule. At 6:00 a.m., the automated blinds ascended in synchronized motion, flooding 23 rooms with reluctant winter light. At 6:15, the espresso machine in the chef's kitchen hummed to life, programmed to brew a double shot Scott would drink standing at the counter, staring at his phone. At 6:30, the day nurse arrived through the service entrance, punching her time card before climbing the stairs to a nursery where 2 children waited in silence. Everything ran like clockwork. Everything ran efficiently. Everything ran except the people living there. Scott Douglas moved through his mornings like a man underwater, present but submerged, breathing but not quite alive. He'd perfected the art of existing in his own home without actually occupying it. Kitchen to garage, garage to office, office to airport, airport to hotel, hotel to airport. The loop repeated with minor variations, a circle that never passed through the nursery on the 3rd floor. He told himself it was necessary. The Singapore deal needed his attention. The merger required his expertise. The investors expected his presence. The truth he wouldn't acknowledge even in the hollow hours before dawn, was simpler and more devastating. Scott Douglas couldn't look at his children without seeing his wife's death certificate. That Tuesday morning, Maria Santos found him in his home office at 7:45 a.m., already dressed in Tom Ford, already reviewing contracts that didn't need reviewing for another 3 days. "Mr. Douglas?" Maria had been his executive assistant for 6 years. She was the only person in his life who dared to interrupt him. "We need to discuss the nanny situation." Scott didn't look up from his laptop. "I thought we agreed to use the agency in Tribeca. They're sending candidates this week." "They already sent 3. You rejected all of them in under 5 minutes." "They weren't qualified. One had a PhD in child development from Stanford." "She talked too much." Scott's jaw tightened. "I don't pay people to have opinions about my family, Maria. I pay them to follow protocols." Maria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried an edge of something Scott couldn't quite identify. Maybe frustration, maybe pity. "The twins need more than protocols, Mr. Douglas. The twins need specialized care, which is what I'm providing." Scott finally looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "Dr. Morrison said developmental delay cases require structure, routine, predictability. Dr. Morrison also recommended you spend time with them." The air in the office seemed to crystallize. Scott's fingers stilled on the keyboard. "I spend time with them." "You haven't been to the nursery in 3 weeks." "I get updates. Daily reports from the nurse, weekly assessments from the therapist. I review every—" "Scott." Maria rarely used his first name. When she did, it meant she was speaking as a friend, not an employee. "Those babies are 18 months old. They've never heard their father's voice outside of a doorway. They don't know you exist." Something flickered across Scott's face. Pain, maybe, or anger, or the ghost of both, before the mask reassembled itself. "What do you want me to say, Maria? That I'm failing them? I know I'm failing them. But at least this way—" His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. "At least this way, they have a chance. If I try to—" He didn't finish. Couldn't finish. Because the truth was that Scott Douglas was terrified. Terrified that if he opened that door, if he stepped into that nursery and held those children, he would break completely. That the grief he'd been holding back for 18 months would finally crush him. Terrified that he would look at Emma and Jacob and feel nothing but blame. Maria pulled a folder from her bag and set it on his desk with deliberate care. "There's someone I want you to meet. She doesn't have fancy degrees or agency representation. But she has something those other nannies didn't." "Which is?" She asked about the children first, not the salary, not the benefits, not the mansion or the job perks. She wanted to know their names, their favorite colors. What makes them smile? Maria paused. Actually, she wanted to know if they smile at all. Scott opened the folder slowly. A simple resume stared back at him. Vanessa Patel, age 27, address in Queens. Education, high school diploma, 2 years at community college before dropping out. Work history, a patchwork of childcare gigs, volunteer positions at community centers, 3 years as a caregiver for her younger siblings. No credentials, no prestigious references. Nothing that screamed qualified to handle developmental delay in billionaire twins. At the bottom, a handwritten note in neat script. Children don't need perfection. They need presence. "She's not qualified," Scott said flatly. "She's the only person who's asked to meet Emma and Jacob before discussing the job. That's not how interviews work. Maybe that's the problem." Maria stood, gathering her things. "She's waiting in the garden room. You have 10 minutes before your conference call." "I didn't agree to—" But Maria was already gone, leaving Scott alone with a resume that felt more like an indictment than an application. Vanessa Patel didn't look like she belonged in the Douglas mansion. That was Scott's first thought when he found her standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows in the garden room, one hand pressed lightly against the glass, staring out at the frost-covered rose bushes that hadn't been tended since Sarah died. She wore a simple navy dress and flats, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. No designer labels. No carefully curated aesthetic. She looked like someone who'd taken 2 buses to get here and walked the final 3 blocks because she didn't want to spend money on a cab. She looked, in other words, like she belonged to the real world, not this marble mausoleum where grief had purchased a permanent lease. Ms. Patel. Scott's voice was professional, distant, the same tone he used in boardrooms. I apologize for the wait. Vanessa turned, and Scott found himself momentarily disarmed by her eyes, warm, direct, carrying a quality of attention that felt almost intrusive. She wasn't looking at him the way most people did, with a mixture of deference and calculation. She was looking at him like she could see straight through the expensive suit to the exhausted man beneath. Mr. Douglas. Her voice was softer than he expected, with the faintest trace of an accent. Indian, maybe, or Pakistani. Thank you for seeing me. Maria speaks highly of you. It wasn't quite true, but it was the kind of opening he used to maintain control of conversations. Maria is kind. Vanessa smiled slightly. But we both know I'm not what you were looking for. The bluntness surprised him. Most people angling for a 6-figure nanny position spent interviews performing competence, listing qualifications, making themselves indispensable. Vanessa Patel seemed completely uninterested in selling herself. Then why are you here? Because Maria told me about Emma and Jacob, and because... She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Because I know what it's like when grief builds walls. Sometimes children get trapped on the wrong side. The air between them shifted. Scott felt his defenses rising, his spine straightening. I'm not sure what Maria told you about my personal circumstances, but she didn't have to tell me anything. Vanessa's voice remained gentle, but something in it suggested she wouldn't be easily dismissed. The house told me everything. Houses always do. I beg your pardon? You have a $40 million mansion full of beautiful things that nobody touches. Fresh flowers delivered weekly that wilt in their vases. A nursery with every developmental toy money can buy, all perfectly organized and completely unused. A music room with a locked door. Her eyes held his. This isn't a home, Mr. Douglas. It's a museum of grief. Scott's hands clenched at his sides. He should have ended the interview right there. Should have called security. Should have. Where are Emma and Jacob? Vanessa asked quietly. The question, so simple, so direct, somehow pierced through 18 months of carefully constructed armor. Upstairs. 3rd floor. The nurse has them. May I meet them? Ms. Patel, I don't think you understand the scope of... Please. Something in that single word stopped him. Not pleading exactly. More like a promise. Just 5 minutes. If I'm not who they need, you'll know immediately. Scott found himself doing something he hadn't done in 3 weeks. Climbing the stairs to the 3rd floor. Each step felt like moving through concrete. His heart rate accelerated. His breath shortened. By the time they reached the nursery door, his palms were sweating. Something that hadn't happened since his first major pitch to venture capitalists a decade ago. The day nurse, a competent woman in her 50s named Helen, looked up in surprise when Scott entered. In 18 months, he'd visited the nursery perhaps a dozen times, always briefly, always with an excuse ready to leave. Mr. Douglas, I wasn't... Ms. Patel would like to meet the children. His voice came out rougher than intended. 5 minutes. Helen nodded slowly, stepping back. And there they were. Emma and Jacob sat in their play yard, an expensive enclosed space filled with sensory mats and developmental blocks, exactly where they'd been sitting the last time Scott had forced himself to check on them. Emma stared at a point somewhere past the window. Jacob had his hand resting on a soft cube, But he wasn't playing with it, just touching it, existing beside it. They didn't look up when the door opened, didn't react to new voices in their space. They simply were. 18 months old and barely present in their own lives. Scott's chest constricted. He started to turn away, the familiar urge to flee rising like bile. But Vanessa was already moving. She didn't rush, didn't make sudden gestures or loud sounds. She simply walked to the edge of the play yard and lowered herself to the floor, sitting cross-legged just outside the barrier, making herself small and unthreatening. "Hi, sweet babies," she whispered, her voice like honey and smoke. "My name is Vanessa." No response. Emma continued staring at nothing. Jacob's fingers remained motionless on the cube. "I'm going to be spending time with you, if that's okay," Vanessa continued as if they'd answered. "We're going to have so much fun together. We'll read stories and sing songs and—" "They don't respond to verbal stimuli," Helen interjected professionally. "We've tried music therapy, audiobooks, constant narration. Dr. Morrison believes—" "Shh." Vanessa held up one finger gently, her eyes never leaving the twins. "Just shh." Helen looked at Scott, clearly offended. Scott should have defended his employee's professionalism. Should have reminded this presumptuous woman that she was a guest here, not yet hired, certainly not in charge. Instead, he watched. Vanessa hummed softly. No recognizable melody, just a gentle rise and fall of notes. Her hand moved slowly through the air, fingers dancing like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. Nothing happened for 30 seconds. 45. A minute. Scott checked his watch, ready to end this farce. Then Emma's head moved. Just slightly, just a fraction of an inch. But her eyes, Sarah's eyes, blue and infinite, tracked toward the sound. Vanessa's humming continued, soft and unhurried. Her fingers painted patterns in the air. Jacob's hand twitched. Once. Twice. "They're just random movements," Helen murmured. "We see it sometimes. It doesn't mean—" But Scott barely heard her, because Emma was still watching Vanessa's hand, still tracking the movement with an intensity he'd never seen in his daughter before. And Jacob's fingers, the ones that had rested motionless on that cube for God knew how long, were tapping to the rhythm of Vanessa's humming. "My God," Scott breathed. Vanessa turned to him, and the look on her face was pure, unguarded certainty. "These children aren't broken, Mr. Douglas. They're just waiting for someone to show them it's safe to come back." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward through every defense Scott had carefully constructed. "What did you say?" "They're waiting," Vanessa repeated softly. "Children who've experienced trauma, birth trauma, loss, grief they can feel but can't name. They retreat inside themselves. It's protection, survival. But they're still in there, Mr. Douglas. Emma and Jacob are still in there. They just need someone patient enough to wait for them." Scott's vision blurred. He turned away sharply, one hand pressed to his mouth, suddenly and violently aware that he was about to break down in front of strangers. "I'll—" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "I'll have Maria send you the contract details. Start date, salary, whatever you need." "Mr. Douglas—" "You're hired, Ms. Patel." He was out the door before she could respond, before Helen could speak, before the tears could fall where anyone might see them. 3 hours later, Vanessa Patel returned to the Douglas mansion with a small suitcase and a canvas bag filled with books. Maria met her at the service entrance, the one the staff used, though Vanessa noticed with quiet observation that Scott had specified she should use the main entrance. A small gesture, perhaps, but meaningful. "He's gone," Maria said without preamble. "Emergency meeting in Boston. Won't be back until Friday." Vanessa nodded slowly. "Does he always run?" "Only when he's scared." Maria's expression softened. "I've worked for Scott Douglas for 6 years. I've seen him negotiate hostile takeovers without blinking, fire executives without hesitation, rebuild a company from bankruptcy in 18 months. But those twins terrify him. Because they remind him of what he lost. Because he's afraid he'll lose them too. So, he loses them first. Maria gestured toward the grand staircase. Your room is on the second floor, east wing. Nursery's above you on the third. Helen will brief you on the schedule, though between you and me, I think Scott's hoping you'll throw the whole thing out. The schedule or the grief? Maria smiled sadly. Both, if you can manage it. Vanessa stood at the base of the stairs, one hand resting on the marble banister, and looked up at the magnificent, hollow mansion stretching above her. 23 rooms of imported materials and museum lighting. A house that had everything money could buy and nothing it couldn't. She thought about Emma's eyes tracking movement for the first time in God knew how long, about Jacob's fingers tapping to a rhythm, about a man who'd built an empire but couldn't enter a nursery without his hands shaking. And she made a promise. Quiet, fierce, unspoken except to herself. These children won't grow up in silence. Somewhere above her, in a nursery full of expensive toys and careful routines, 2 babies waited in the dark. But not for much longer. Not if Vanessa Patel had anything to say about it. Scott Douglas returned from Boston on Friday evening with a splitting headache, 3 signed contracts, and a detailed instruction manual he'd spent 4 hours perfecting on the flight home. He found Vanessa in the nursery at 6:47 p.m., 13 minutes past the twins' designated dinner time, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Emma in her lap and Jacob leaning against her side. She was singing something soft and meandering, spooning pureed sweet potato toward Emma's mouth, while Jacob played with the loose thread on Vanessa's cardigan. No high chair, no proper positioning, no adherence to the occupational therapist's recommended feeding protocol. Scott's jaw tightened. Ms. Patel. Vanessa looked up, and if she was startled by his sudden appearance, she didn't show it. Mr. Douglas, welcome home. It's nearly 7 o'clock. Is it? She glanced at the window, where dusk was settling over Manhattan like a bruise. Time moves differently up here. I think the twins like it that way. Scott stepped into the room, acutely aware that he hadn't crossed this threshold in 4 days. The nursery looked different. The developmental toys remained organized on their shelves, but now there were books scattered across the floor. Picture books with worn covers that definitely hadn't come from the approved curriculum list. A string of paper stars hung from the window frame, rotating slowly in the heat from the radiator. Someone had been living here, not just maintaining it. I've prepared comprehensive guidelines for Emma and Jacob's care. Scott held out the binder. 47 pages, color-coded, cross-referenced. Everything you need is documented. Feeding schedules, therapy appointments, sleep protocols, emergency contacts. Mr. Douglas. Vanessa's voice was gentle but firm. She shifted Emma slightly, wiping a bit of sweet potato from the baby's chin. I appreciate the effort you put into this. I really do. But children don't read schedules. I'm sorry. Children read hearts. She met his gaze evenly. They respond to rhythm and emotion and presence, not timelines. The binder felt suddenly heavy in Scott's hands. Dr. Morrison specifically recommended structured routine. Predictability is essential for children with developmental delays. It provides safety, security, a framework for growth. Vanessa nodded. I know. I've read Dr. Morrison's papers. All of them, actually. I went to the library on Wednesday. That surprised him. You researched. Of course I researched. Emma and Jacob deserve someone who understands what they're facing. She set down the spoon and turned fully toward him, Jacob still tucked against her side. But here's what Dr. Morrison's papers don't tell you. Structure without connection is just a cage. These babies need more than schedules, Mr. Douglas. They need someone to show them that the world is worth waking up for. Scott's throat tightened. That's what the therapists are for. The therapists visit twice a week for an hour each session. That's 2 hours out of 168. Vanessa's expression softened. The rest of the time, Emma and Jacob are learning what love looks like. Right now, it looks like efficiency and distance and people following protocols. Is that really what you want them to learn? The question landed like a punch to the solar plexus. Scott set the binder down on the changing table with more force than necessary. What I want, Ms. Patel, is for my children to receive the best possible care based on medical expertise, not sentiment. Sentiment. Vanessa repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter. Is that what you think this is? I think you've been here 4 days, and you're already disregarding professional recommendations in favor of... He gestured vaguely at the scene before him. The casual positioning, the paper stars, the warmth that seemed to radiate from this woman like heat from a fire. Whatever this is. This, Vanessa said quietly, is what it looks like when someone pays attention. Would you like me to show you? Before Scott could respond, she lifted Emma gently and stood, crossing to him with the baby in her arms. Emma's head lolled slightly, the low muscle tone that Dr. Morrison had warned might be permanent, but her eyes were open, tracking. Hold her, Vanessa said. Scott stepped back instinctively. I don't think... Mr. Douglas. Something in Vanessa's voice stopped him, not pleading, not demanding, just certain. When was the last time you held your daughter? The silence stretched between them, like a chasm. I hold them, Scott managed finally. I've held them. When? I don't keep track of... Wednesday night, 2:47 a.m. Vanessa's voice remained gentle, but her words were surgical. Emma was crying. I heard you stop outside the nursery door. You stood there for 4 minutes. Then you went back to your room. Scott's face flushed. You have no right to... I have every right. You hired me to care for these children, which means I need to understand what they're learning about love and safety, and whether the people in their lives will stay or run. She held Emma out. So hold your daughter, Mr. Douglas. Please. The please undid him. Scott's hands moved automatically, taking Emma's weight, feeling the solid warmth of her against his chest. She was heavier than he remembered. 18 months old, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd... Emma's hand moved, small fingers curling against his collar. Scott froze. She's holding you, Vanessa murmured. Do you feel that? She knows you. She's been waiting for you. Something broke open in Scott's chest, something he'd been keeping locked and buried and safely distant. He looked down at Emma, at Sarah's eyes in his daughter's face, and felt 18 months of grief try to crush him all at once. I can't. His voice cracked. He thrust Emma back toward Vanessa, stumbling backward. I have calls to make. Conference with Singapore at midnight. Just follow the manual, Ms. Patel. That's what I'm paying you for. He was out of the nursery before Vanessa could respond, before the tears could come, before he had to face what he'd just admitted. That holding his daughter terrified him more than any boardroom battle ever had. Over the next 2 weeks, an unspoken war developed between Scott Douglas and Vanessa Patel, fought not with words, but with principles. Scott left printed schedules on the nursery door each morning, color-coded and precise. Vanessa ignored them. Scott hired a consultant to conduct a formal assessment of the twins' developmental progress and provide data-driven recommendations. Vanessa smiled politely during the 2-hour evaluation, then went back to singing lullabies and playing with building blocks on the floor. Scott installed monitors in the nursery so he could observe the twins' activities from his office, checking for adherence to therapeutic protocols. Instead, he found himself watching Vanessa. She moved through the nursery like someone conducting a symphony only she could hear. Everything she did seemed to flow, Feeding time melted into playtime. Playtime dissolved into music time. Music time transformed into quiet rest. There were no hard transitions, no rigid schedules, just a gentle rhythm that the twins began, almost imperceptibly, to follow. In the mornings, Vanessa would lift Emma and Jacob from their cribs, humming softly as she changed them, her voice low and melodic. Scott watched through the monitor as she massaged their hands, slow, deliberate movements, her thumbs tracing circles on tiny palms, while whispering things he couldn't quite hear. During meals, she never forced the spoon, never followed the chart that specified exactly how many ounces of pureed vegetables each twin should consume. She simply offered, waited, offered again. And when Jacob turned his head away, she didn't mark it down as refusal to feed. She just kissed his forehead and said, "That's okay, baby. Maybe later." The twins still didn't speak, still didn't walk, still didn't respond in any of the measurable ways Dr. Morrison's assessments tracked. But they watched her. Emma's eyes followed Vanessa's movements across the nursery. Jacob's head turned toward her voice. Small things, unmeasurable things, things that wouldn't show up in any progress report. Things that Scott found himself noticing despite his determination to remain detached. One Wednesday afternoon, Scott came home early, a rarity, but the Tokyo markets had closed and his evening calls had been canceled, to find Vanessa in the music room. The music room. The one he'd kept locked for 18 months. The one that still smelled faintly of Sarah's perfume and contained her piano, her sheet music, her presence preserved like something in amber. The door stood open. Scott's hands clenched into fists as he crossed the marble foyer, anger rising like a tide. He'd told Maria explicitly, had written it into every staff contract. No one enters Sarah's music room. No one touches her things. That space was... He stopped in the doorway. Vanessa sat at the piano bench with Emma and Jacob on the floor beside her, surrounded by cushions. She wasn't playing. The key cover remained closed, but she was humming, her hand resting on the piano's polished surface, like she was feeling for a heartbeat. "This was your mama's piano," she said softly to the twins, who sat motionless but attentive. "She played beautiful music here, filled this whole house with songs." Scott's anger evaporated, replaced by something more dangerous. Grief, sharp and immediate. "Get out!" Vanessa turned, unsurprised to find him there. "Mr. Douglas, get out of this room, now." His voice shook. "You had no right, no permission. This space is full of love," Vanessa finished quietly. "Full of memories that Emma and Jacob deserve to know. They're 18 months old. They don't..." They knew her. Vanessa's voice was gentle but unyielding. Babies know their mother's voice from the womb. They recognize heartbeats, rhythms, the sound of breathing. Emma and Jacob lived with Sarah for 9 months. They knew her, Mr. Douglas. And by keeping this room locked, you're telling them that remembering her is dangerous. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Vanessa stood slowly, stepping over the cushions. I lost my mother when I was 12. Cancer, slow and terrible. And you know what my father did? He packed up all her things within a week. Donated her clothes, threw out her books, removed every trace of her from our house. He thought he was protecting us, thought it would help us move on. Ms. Patel, it didn't help. It destroyed us. Her eyes held his, dark and certain. We needed to remember her, Mr. Douglas. We needed her things, and her spaces, and her presence, even if it hurt. Because grief that gets locked away doesn't disappear. It just builds higher walls. Scott's breath came shallow and fast. You're fired. No, I'm not. Excuse me? You're not firing me. You're scared, and you're lashing out because I opened a door you've been afraid to walk through. But you're not firing me. Vanessa's voice softened. Because if you were going to fire me, you would have done it 2 weeks ago when I stopped following your schedules. You would have done it 3 days ago when I took the twins outside without permission. You would have done it yesterday when I started letting them nap in your wife's old reading chair instead of their cribs. Scott went still. You what? Emma sleeps better there. The chair still smells like Sarah, faintly, under the leather cleaner, and Emma curls up in it like she's being held. Jacob likes the window seat in her bedroom, where the light comes through in the afternoons. They're looking for her, Mr. Douglas. And instead of helping them find the pieces of her that still exist, you're keeping those pieces locked away like evidence of a crime. The words landed like stones, each one precise and devastating. Scott's vision blurred. He turned away sharply, one hand braced against the doorframe. I don't know how to. I know. Vanessa's voice came from directly behind him now, close, but not touching. And that's okay. But you hired me to help Emma and Jacob. So let me help them. Let me open these doors. And if it breaks me, then it breaks you. Simple, honest, unbearable. But you're already broken, Mr. Douglas. The only question is whether you're going to stay that way. That night, Scott couldn't sleep. At 11:43 p.m., he found himself standing outside the nursery door again, listening. Vanessa's voice filtered through, not singing this time, but speaking. Soft, rhythmic, like a prayer. You can do it, babies. Mama's watching from heaven. She's so proud of you. So proud of how strong you are. How brave. You can do it. One day soon, you're going to surprise everyone. One day soon, you're going to show them what I already know. That you're perfect. That you're enough. That you were worth everything. Scott's hand pressed against the door, his forehead following. Inside, Vanessa continued. And your daddy loves you so much. He's just forgot how to show it. But we'll wait for him. We'll be patient. Because that's what families do. They wait for each other to find their way home. Scott's shoulders shook. Silent tears tracked down his face, hot and shameful. He couldn't do this. Couldn't face this. Couldn't. Emma made a sound. Not a word. Not even a syllable. Just a small, soft noise, half sigh, half coo, that shattered Scott's composure completely. Because it was a response. A reaction. The first voluntary sound his daughter had made in 18 months. And she'd made it for Vanessa. Not for him. For the woman who'd been there for 2 weeks. Not the father who'd been absent for 18 months. Scott pushed away from the door, stumbling down the hallway toward his office, toward anywhere that wasn't here, anywhere he didn't have to face what he'd let happen. Behind him, Vanessa's voice continued, patient and certain. That's it, Emma. That's my good girl. You can do it, baby. You can do anything. 3 days later, Scott worked late in his home office, reviewing quarterly projections that didn't need reviewing, checking emails that could wait until morning, procrastinating, hiding. At 9:15 p.m., he heard something that made him look up. Vanessa's voice, coming from the library down the hall. The library, where no one ever went. Where Sarah's books still lined the shelves, collecting dust, waiting for readers who would never come. Scott moved toward the sound without deciding to, drawn by something he didn't want to name. He found Vanessa in the leather armchair by the window, Sarah's chair, the one with the reading lamp, with Emma and Jacob nestled against her sides. She held a picture book, something with bright illustrations of forests and foxes, and she read aloud with complete commitment, giving each character a different voice. The twins didn't react, didn't turn pages or point or make sounds, but their eyes tracked the pictures. Their bodies leaned into Vanessa's warmth. They were present, engaged in a way Scott had never seen before. You really think they understand? The words left Scott's mouth before he could stop them. Vanessa looked up, unsurprised as always to find him watching. Maybe not yet, but their hearts do. That's not how language acquisition works, isn't it? She marked her place with a finger, meeting his gaze. Language isn't just words, Mr. Douglas. It's rhythm and emotion and connection. These babies are learning that stories exist, that voices carry meaning, that being close to someone while they share something beautiful is worth paying attention to. She paused. Isn't that where all language starts? With the desire to connect? Scott had no answer for that. Vanessa patted the ottoman near her feet. Would you like to help? I should. I have work. Would you like to help? Firmer this time. An invitation that felt more like a challenge. Scott found himself moving forward, lowering himself onto the ottoman with the awkwardness of someone who'd forgotten how to occupy space without purpose or agenda. Vanessa handed him the book. Your turn. I'm not good at... You're their father. That makes you good enough. She adjusted Emma slightly so the baby could see the pictures. Just read. They'll do the rest. Scott looked down at the book. Something about a brave little fox searching for home, and felt his throat close up. But he read. His voice came out rough and uncertain. Nothing like Vanessa's smooth cadence. He didn't do character voices, didn't add inflection or drama. He just read. One word after another, one sentence following the next. And after 3 pages, Jacob's hand moved. Small, tentative, reaching across Vanessa's lap toward Scott. Not quite touching, just reaching, trying. Scott's vision blurred. He kept reading, his voice breaking on every 3rd word, tears sliding down his face and dropping onto pages he could barely see. Vanessa's hand settled on his shoulder, brief, grounding, and she whispered, See. They were just waiting for you to try. The changes started so small that Scott almost missed them. Almost. 3 weeks into Vanessa's tenure, the Douglas mansion began to sound different. Not louder, exactly, but fuller. Where there had been only the hollow echo of expensive silence, now there were other sounds. The soft pulse of a hand drum, Vanessa's voice weaving melodies through the hallways, the shuffle of feet on carpet as she danced with Emma in her arms. Scott told himself it was ambient noise, background distraction, nothing meaningful. But he found himself pausing at the base of the stairs each evening, briefcase in hand, listening. On a Tuesday morning, Scott watched through the nursery monitor as Vanessa spread a rainbow of silk scarves across the floor, crimson, sapphire, emerald, gold, and let them drift through shafts of sunlight. Look, Emma, Vanessa murmured, dragging a blue scarf slowly across the carpet. Watch how it moves. See how the light catches it? Emma sat propped against cushions, her expression typically vacant, eyes focused on nothing. But then, so quickly Scott almost thought he'd imagined it, Emma's gaze shifted, tracked the movement of the blue scarf for perhaps 2 seconds before drifting away again. Scott leaned closer to the monitor. Vanessa didn't react with excitement or fanfare. She simply continued moving the scarf, humming a melody that seemed to match its undulation. After a moment, she picked up a red one, let it flutter toward Jacob. Jacob's eyes followed it. Definitely followed it. For 3 seconds this time. Scott checked the timestamp on the monitor, made a mental note. Correlation versus causation. Could be coincidence. Could be random neural firing. Dr. Morrison had warned him about seeing patterns where none existed, about false hope built on wishful interpretation of meaningless gestures. But he saved the video file anyway. By the end of that week, Scott had accumulated 14 clips. Emma tracking movement 7 times. Jacob reaching toward a rattle twice. Both twins turning their heads toward Vanessa's voice on 5 separate occasions. Coincidence, he told himself firmly, reviewing the footage at 11 p.m. in his office, whiskey untouched at his elbow. Developmental randomness. But a small, dangerous voice in the back of his mind whispered, what if it's not? Vanessa's methods, if they could be called methods, seemed to follow no scientific protocol Scott could identify. She didn't use the approved sensory integration techniques, didn't follow the occupational therapist's recommended sequences. Instead, she seemed to operate on pure instinct, introducing stimuli in whatever order felt right to her in any given moment. Music 1 hour, textured fabrics the next. Then finger paints, which Scott only discovered when he found tiny blue handprints on the nursery wall. Vanessa had left them there, claiming they were evidence of engagement. She sang constantly, not children's songs from the approved playlist, but melodies that seemed to come from nowhere, improvised and strange and somehow hypnotic. She filled the nursery with color, hung prisms in the windows so rainbows danced across walls, brought in wind chimes that tinkled softly whenever the heating kicked on. Sensory bombardment, Scott muttered to himself, watching her tie bells to the twins' ankles so they'd chime with every kick. Unstructured stimulus exposure with no control group or measurable outcomes. But Emma kicked her feet 3 times that afternoon. Deliberate movements, not random spasms, apparently just to hear the bells sing. And Scott couldn't explain that away. "I need to speak with you about Ms. Patel's approach," Scott told Dr. Morrison during their monthly consultation call. "She's abandoned the recommended protocols entirely in favor of, I'm not even sure what to call it. Sensory improvisation?" Dr. Morrison's face on the video screen remained professionally neutral. "Is she causing the children distress?" "No, but are they regressing in any measurable way?" "Not exactly, but the methodology is completely..." "Mr. Douglas." Dr. Morrison leaned forward slightly. "You hired me to provide expertise on developmental trauma, which I've done. But I'm not there in the home. If this caregiver has established rapport with the twins, and they're not exhibiting signs of distress, my recommendation would be to observe without interference. Sometimes unconventional approaches yield surprising results. So you're saying I should just let her continue?" "I'm saying that rigid adherence to protocol isn't always the answer, especially with cases like Emma and Jacob, where emotional attachment is as crucial as technical intervention." Dr. Morrison paused. "Has Ms. Patel formed a bond with the children?" Scott thought about the way the twins oriented toward Vanessa's voice, the way Emma's fingers had clutched at Vanessa's cardigan yesterday morning, the way Jacob's crying had stopped, actually stopped, when Vanessa picked him up after he'd fallen. "Yes," Scott admitted quietly. "She has." "Then let her work. You can always course-correct later if needed." But after the call ended, Scott sat staring at his blank computer screen, a familiar anxiety coiling in his chest. Because if Vanessa's approach worked, if love and instinct and unscientific warmth succeeded where protocols and expertise had failed, what did that say about him? About the 18 months he'd spent maintaining distance and following schedules and convincing himself that professional detachment was the same as proper care? What did it say about the father who'd been too afraid to hold his own children? The following week, Scott had a 4 p.m. call with the Singapore investors, crucial negotiations that would determine the next phase of the merger. He was in his home office, headphones on, spreadsheets open, when movement on the nursery monitor caught his eye. Vanessa had propped Emma in a sitting position against pillows, then knelt a few feet away, arms outstretched. "Come on, sweet girl," Vanessa coaxed softly. "Come to me. I know you can do it." Emma swayed slightly, muscle tone still weak, head bobbing. Then, impossible, improbable, unmistakable. Emma leaned forward. Not much. Maybe an inch, maybe less. But it was intentional, directed. A movement toward Vanessa rather than a collapse into empty space. Scott's breath caught. "Mr. Douglas." The voice in his headphones. Chen Wei, CFO of the Singapore branch. "Did you receive the updated figures?" "Yes," Scott managed, eyes locked on the monitor. "Yes, the figures are acceptable." On screen, Emma leaned forward again, farther this time. her small hands pressing against the carpet. She was trying, actually trying, making a conscious effort to move toward Vanessa. Regarding the third quarter projections, I need to call you back. Scott yanked off the headphones, already moving toward the door. Mr. Douglas, we have a very narrow window. Scott ended the call. He took the stairs 2 at a time, arriving at the nursery door breathless and slightly wild-eyed. Through the crack, he could see Vanessa still kneeling, still coaxing, while Emma, impossibly, miraculously, crawled forward 6 inches before her arms gave out. Vanessa caught her, laughing with pure joy. You did it! Emma, you did it! You're so strong, baby, so brave! Emma didn't smile, didn't make a sound, but she allowed herself to be held, her head resting against Vanessa's shoulder in a way that looked almost like contentment. Scott pressed his back against the hallway wall, hand over his mouth, a tsunami of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. His daughter had moved, had tried, had shown intention and effort and desire, all the things the specialists said might never develop. And he'd almost missed it because he was negotiating profit margins. That evening, Scott stayed late in the office, door closed, making calls he didn't need to make. At 8:30 p.m., he heard Maria's voice in the outer office, speaking quietly. I don't know, honestly. She's wonderful with the twins, but Scott's so closed off. I think he's threatened by how quickly she's connecting with them. A pause. Another voice. Probably Jerome from legal, who sometimes stopped by after hours. That's Scott's problem to solve. Maria again. Vanessa's doing exactly what those children need. If he can't see that, he sees it. Scott's own voice, louder than intended as he stepped into the doorway. I see it perfectly clearly. Maria startled, color rising in her cheeks. Mr. Douglas, I didn't realize. It's fine. Scott's jaw tightened. I'm heading home. Have the revised contracts on my desk by morning. He left before she could respond, before he had to explain why his hands were shaking, why walking back into that house felt like approaching a battlefield where he'd already lost. But not before he pulled out his phone and placed another call. Dr. Morrison, Scott Douglas, I need you to review something. Video files from the nursery. I need an objective assessment of whether the twins are actually progressing or if I'm... He paused. Seeing things that aren't there. Of course. Send them over. I'll review tonight. After ending the call, Scott sat in his car in the mansion's circular driveway for 20 minutes, staring at the lit windows of the 3rd floor, where his children existed in a world he'd chosen not to enter. Where a woman he'd hired 3 weeks ago was accomplishing what 18 months of expertise and protocol had failed to achieve. A sentimental risk. The phrase had lodged in his mind, accurate and damning. Because that's what Vanessa was, wasn't it? An unknown variable. An uncontrolled element. Someone operating on emotion rather than evidence. Feeling rather than data. Everything Scott had spent his professional life avoiding. Everything that was apparently working. The call came from Dr. Morrison at 11:47 p.m. Scott was still awake, still reviewing files he didn't need to review. I've analyzed the footage, Dr. Morrison said without preamble. And I need you to tell me what's happening in that house. Scott's stomach dropped. What do you mean? I mean that the behavioral changes I'm seeing are significant. Statistically improbable, given the baseline assessments. Emma's directed movement, Jacob's visual tracking, the synchronized response to auditory stimuli. These aren't random, Mr. Douglas. These are genuine developmental leaps. But 3 weeks isn't enough time for... No, it isn't. Which is why I'm asking, what changed? What's different about the environment or care approach? Scott thought about silk scarves and improvised songs and a woman who read hearts instead of schedules. The new nanny, he said finally. Vanessa Patel. She's unconventional. unconventional how. She doesn't follow the protocols, uses music and color and physical touch, talks to them constantly, like they understand every word. She's, Scott struggled for the right terminology, emotionally immersive, unscientific. Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Douglas, I'm going to say something that may be difficult to hear. Go ahead. Sometimes the most scientific thing we can do is acknowledge that human connection operates outside our measurement systems. What you're describing, that emotional immersion, may be precisely what Emma and Jacob need. Not instead of therapeutic intervention, but alongside it. A pause. Are you comfortable continuing with Ms. Patel's approach? Comfortable? Scott laughed, the sound bitter. No. But I'm not comfortable with anything about this situation. Fair enough. Keep documenting. I'll review again in 2 weeks. After the call ended, Scott sat in the dark, the weight of his own inadequacy pressing down like atmospheric pressure. Dr. Morrison had said human connection, but what he meant was love. The thing Scott had been withholding for 18 months, the thing Vanessa gave freely, without measurement or reservation, the thing that was apparently healing his children while he hid in spreadsheets and conference calls. 2 days later, Scott came home at 6:15 p.m., early again, though he wouldn't admit he was doing it intentionally, to find the nursery door open and sounds coming from inside that made him stop mid-step. Laughter. Children's laughter. High and delighted and unmistakably real. Scott moved to the doorway, as if in a dream. Vanessa sat cross-legged on the floor with a blanket draped over her head, playing peekaboo. Emma and Jacob sat facing her, propped by cushions, and they were laughing. Not just smiling. Actually laughing. Small, breathy giggles that erupted each time Vanessa dropped the blanket and revealed her face. Boo! Vanessa's eyes sparkled with joy. I see you, babies! More laughter. Emma's shoulders shook. Jacob's mouth opened wide in a gummy grin. Scott's vision blurred. He stood there frozen, watching this impossible scene, and felt something inside him that had been frozen for 18 months begin, finally, to crack. Vanessa must have sensed his presence because she looked up, blanket still draped over her hair, and smiled. Not apologetic, not defensive, just quietly triumphant. Mr. Douglas, you're home early. Scott couldn't finish the sentence. His throat had closed around words he didn't have. Would you like to join us? I don't. He stopped. Started again. How did you make them laugh? Vanessa's expression softened, and when she spoke, her voice carried something that sounded like both sadness and hope. I didn't. They just remembered how. The words hit Scott like a physical blow. Remembered how. As if laughter had been there all along, waiting. As if joy was simply something his children had forgotten, not something they'd lost. As if, and this was the thought that broke him, they'd been waiting for someone to show them it was safe to feel again. Emma giggled once more, reaching toward the blanket, toward Vanessa, toward the woman who'd given her permission to be happy. And Scott Douglas, standing in the doorway of his children's nursery, finally allowed himself to admit the truth he'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. Vanessa Patel wasn't a sentimental risk. She was a miracle he didn't deserve and couldn't afford to lose. That night, Scott did something he hadn't done since Sarah died. He went to the nursery after Vanessa had put the twins down, stood between their cribs in the dim glow of the nightlight, and let himself look, really look, at Emma and Jacob. Sarah's eyes, Sarah's nose, Sarah's delicate bone structure emerging from baby roundness, but their own expressions, their own tiny personalities beginning to surface now that someone had created space for them to exist. I'm sorry, Scott whispered into the darkness. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I'm so sorry I let you wait so long. Emma stirred in her sleep, one small hand flexing, and Scott, carefully, terrified but determined, reached down and held it. Her fingers curled around his thumb. She didn't wake, didn't open her eyes, but she held on. And for the first time in 18 months, Scott Douglas allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to learn how to be their father. Even if he had to learn from someone else first. Vanessa made her decision on a Thursday morning while watching Emma stare at a square of sunlight on the nursery carpet. Just stare. Not reach for it. Not crawl toward it. Simply exist in its presence, as if the warmth on her face was as close to the outside world as she'd ever get. 4 weeks. 4 weeks of progress measured in millimeters. A giggle here, a moment of eye contact there. Tiny victories celebrated in a mansion that felt increasingly like a gilded cage. The twins were waking up. Vanessa could see it in 100 small ways. The way Jacob now turned toward her voice. The way Emma's fingers had started exploring textures instead of lying dormant. The way both of them leaned into her embrace rather than tolerating it. But they were waking up inside a museum. Inside controlled environments with filtered air and regulated temperature and zero unpredictability. Inside a world designed to keep them safe from everything, including life itself. Vanessa looked at the sunlight, then at Emma's small face, tilted toward its warmth, and thought, enough. She found Maria in the kitchen at 10 a.m., reviewing the week's grocery order. "I need to take the twins out today," Vanessa said without preamble. "To the park. Central Park, the children's area near the boathouse." Maria looked up sharply. "Mr. Douglas's standing instruction is no outings without his explicit approval. It's in your contract, Section 4, Paragraph, I know what's in my contract." Then you know he'd have to approve it. And he's in Boston until tomorrow evening. Unreachable in meetings all day. So I'm telling you instead. Vanessa met Maria's gaze evenly. "I'm taking Emma and Jacob to the park this afternoon. If Mr. Douglas has a problem with that, he can take it up with me when he returns." Maria set down her pen slowly. "Vanessa, I understand your intentions, but do you? Do you understand that those children have never felt grass under their hands? Never heard birds that weren't on an audio track? Never breathed air that wasn't processed through HEPA filters?" Vanessa's voice remained quiet, but something fierce burned beneath it. "They're healing, Maria. They're coming back to life. But they're doing it inside a tomb. How long before they realize that being awake just means being trapped? That's not fair. Mr. Douglas is trying to protect them, I know. By keeping them isolated from everything that makes life worth living." Vanessa softened slightly. "I'm not trying to undermine him. But these babies need more than safety. They need the world, and I'm going to show it to them." Maria was quiet for a long moment, conflict playing across her face. Finally, she sighed. "There are emergency phones in the equipment room. Take one. And for God's sake, keep them away from the pond." It wasn't permission, but it wasn't refusal either. Vanessa nodded once and left to pack. At 2:30 p.m., Vanessa dressed Emma and Jacob in matching maroon onesies. Soft, warm, with tiny elephants embroidered on the feet. She packed a canvas bag with diapers, bottles, a blanket, and a ridiculous amount of hope. Helen, the day nurse, watched from the doorway with barely concealed disapproval. "Mr. Douglas will be extremely displeased," Helen said stiffly. "Then he can fire me tomorrow." Vanessa settled Emma into the double stroller, then Jacob. But today, these children are going to feel sunshine. She was out the front door before Helen could formulate another objection, before she could second-guess herself, before fear could override conviction. The October air hit them like a baptism, crisp and alive, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant coffee carts, and the indefinable smell of the city being itself. Emma blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. Jacob's eyes went wide, and Vanessa pushed the stroller down Fifth Avenue toward Central Park, toward grass and trees and the glorious chaos of children being children, and didn't look back. The conservatory garden was quieter than the main playgrounds. Fewer crowds, more space. A pocket of deliberate beauty in the middle of urban intensity. Vanessa spread the blanket under an oak tree, where dappled sunlight filtered through gold-tinged leaves. She lifted Emma out first, setting her on the blanket, then Jacob. For a long moment, neither twin moved. They simply sat, blinking in the brightness, surrounded by stimuli their nervous systems had never processed. Wind moving through branches, the distant shout of playing children, a dog barking, the rustle of a jogger passing on the path. Then Emma's hand moved. Slowly, tentatively, she reached down and touched the grass. Her fingers pressed into it, withdrew, pressed again, testing, exploring. A look of concentration crossed her small face. Not distress, but profound focus. As if she was trying to categorize this new sensation against the limited database of her 18-month existence. Jacob followed his sister's lead, patting the ground with his palm. "That's grass, babies," Vanessa whispered, her throat tight. "Growing right out of the earth. Isn't it wonderful?" A butterfly, impossibly, perfectly, chose that moment to land on the blanket's edge. Monarch orange and black, wings opening and closing with delicate precision. Both twins stared. Then Emma giggled, that small, breathy sound that still felt like a miracle every time Vanessa heard it, and reached toward the butterfly. The butterfly lifted off, fluttering a few feet away. And Emma, tiny, developmentally delayed Emma, who'd never shown motivation to move independently, crawled after it. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Not far. Maybe 12 inches before Emma's arms gave out, and she collapsed onto her stomach in the grass. But it was intentional, purposeful. Movement driven by curiosity and desire, rather than therapy protocol or adult coaxing. Jacob, not to be outdone by his sister, rolled onto his stomach and pushed up on his forearms, rocking slightly as if remembering something his body had forgotten it could do. "Oh my God," Vanessa breathed. "Oh my God, babies, look at you. Look at you trying." She didn't reach for them, didn't help or intervene. She just bore witness, tears streaming down her face, as Emma and Jacob engaged with the world for the first time as active participants rather than passive observers. A jogger passed, then doubled back, stopping at a polite distance. "Your babies?" the woman asked, slightly out of breath, gesturing toward the twins. "Yes," Vanessa answered without thinking, because in every way that mattered, it was true. "They're beautiful. How old?" 18 months. Oh, mine was such a terror at that age. Into everything. The woman smiled. "Enjoy it while it lasts. The peace before the storm." Vanessa laughed, the sound broken and joyful. "I'm counting on the storm." They stayed for an hour. Vanessa narrated everything. The trees, oak and maple, babies, they change colors when the air gets cold. The sounds, that's a cardinal. Hear how he sings? The sensations, that's wind. It carries smells from far away. She gave them tiny pieces of the world, carefully curated for wonder. Emma fell asleep against Vanessa's side, one small hand clutching grass she refused to release. Jacob stayed awake, but quiet. His eyes tracking clouds with an attention span that would have made Dr. Morrison weep with professional joy. At 4:15, Vanessa's phone buzzed, Maria's name on the screen. She answered with her heart already sinking. "Hello? Where are you?" Maria's voice was tight, controlled. "Please tell me you're on your way back." "We're in Central Park, the conservatory garden." "We're fine, Maria. The twins are—" "Scott's home. He came back early. Vanessa, he's losing his mind. He found the nursery empty, and Helen told him you took them out without permission, and he—" Maria's voice dropped. "He's in his car. He's trying to find you, and he's furious." The bottom dropped out of Vanessa's stomach. "How long ago did he leave?" 10 minutes. I told him where you were. I had to. He was about to call the police. Okay. Okay. We're leaving now. Vanessa was already moving, scooping up Emma, reaching for Jacob. Tell him we're heading back. Tell him the twins are safe. Vanessa? Maria hesitated. He thinks you kidnapped them. The word landed like a slap. I'll explain when we get there. Vanessa ended the call, hands shaking as she tried to settle both twins back in the stroller. Emma started fussing, sensing Vanessa's distress. Jacob's face crumpled, preparing to cry. It's okay, babies, Vanessa murmured, forcing calm into her voice. It's okay. We're just going home now. Everything's fine. But her hands fumbled with the stroller straps, and her breath came too fast, and she knew that everything was about to fall apart. She made it 50 yards down the path before she heard him. Vanessa! Scott's voice, raw and ragged, cutting through the afternoon air like a wound. Vanessa turned slowly, still gripping the stroller handles. Scott Douglas strode toward her across the grass. No, not strode, nearly ran. His face a mask of rage and terror, and something that looked horribly like betrayal. He'd abandoned his suit jacket somewhere. His tie hung loose. He looked like a man who'd been seconds away from collapse and chosen violence instead. Mr. Douglas, don't. The word came out strangled. Don't you dare. Mr. Douglas me right now. What the hell were you thinking? People on the path were starting to stare. A nearby mother pulled her child closer. I can explain. You took them. Scott's voice cracked. You took my children out of my house without permission, without security, without... He seemed to choke on the words. I came home, and they were gone. Do you understand? They were gone, and no one knew where. And Helen said you just... They're safe. Vanessa's voice remained steady, despite her hammering heart. They're perfectly safe. We've been right here the entire time. That's not the point. Scott was nearly shouting now. You don't get to make these decisions. You don't get to just take them wherever you want. There are protocols for a reason. Safety measures. I told you no outings without approval. I know what you told me. Then why? Because they're dying in there. The words erupted from Vanessa with a force that surprised them both. Your beautiful, brilliant children are dying inside that mansion, and you're so obsessed with keeping them safe that you can't see you're suffocating them. Scott stepped back, as if she'd struck him. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Vanessa moved around the stroller, putting herself between Scott and the twins. When was the last time Emma felt grass? When was the last time Jacob heard birds that weren't on an audio file? You've built them a perfect prison, Mr. Douglas, and you call it protection. I call it keeping them alive, keeping them healthy. They have compromised immune systems, developmental delays. They need to live. Vanessa's eyes blazed. They need sunshine and wind and the mess and chaos of the real world. They need... But Scott never finished the sentence. Because behind Vanessa, Emma made a sound, a soft, determined grunt, and Scott's eyes went wide. Vanessa turned. Emma had pulled herself up using the stroller frame. Standing. Actually standing. Weight on her wobbly legs. One hand gripping the handlebar for balance. Emma! Vanessa breathed. And Emma let go. For one impossible heartbeat, she stood unsupported, swaying slightly in the autumn breeze. Then, miracle of miracles, she took a step. 1 foot forward, then another. Tiny, uncertain, but undeniably intentional. 3 steps toward Vanessa before her legs gave out and she tumbled forward into Vanessa's waiting arms. The world seemed to stop. Vanessa caught her, both of them collapsing onto the grass, and Emma was laughing, actually laughing, delighted by her own achievement, and Vanessa was crying, pressing kisses to Emma's hair, whispering, "You did it, baby. You did it. I knew you could." A shadow fell across them. Scott stood frozen, his face drained of color. One hand outstretched as if he'd been reaching for Emma, but couldn't make his body complete the motion. She... His voice came out barely a whisper. They're walking? As if in answer, Jacob, apparently unwilling to let his sister claim all the glory, gripped the stroller's wheel and hauled himself upright. For a moment he just stood there, triumphant, grinning toothlessly at his own accomplishment. Then he took one step, two, three wobbling steps across the blanket, before sitting down hard on his bottom, looking surprised but pleased. Scott's knees buckled. He dropped onto the grass as if someone had cut his strings, both hands pressed to his mouth, his breath coming in harsh, broken gasps. "They're walking," he repeated, the words dissolving into something between a laugh and a sob. "Oh my God, they're walking!" Vanessa held Emma close, tears streaming freely now. They just needed to feel the world love them. Scott looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shattered completely. All the anger, all the fear, all the carefully constructed control collapsing into raw, undefended emotion. "How?" His voice broke. "How did you—" "I didn't." Vanessa's voice was gentle, certain. "They did this themselves. They were always capable, Mr. Douglas. They just needed a reason to try." Scott reached out with shaking hands toward Emma, who regarded him with curious eyes, Sarah's eyes, before reaching back. Their fingers touched. And Scott Douglas, 35-year-old billionaire CEO, master of boardrooms and builder of empires, broke down crying in the middle of Central Park while his children, his miraculously walking children, watched him finally allow himself to feel. Around them, the park continued its gentle chaos, joggers passing, dogs barking, children playing. Life, messy and uncontrolled and absolutely perfect, carried on. Emma patted Scott's hand with her tiny palm, confused by his tears, but compelled by instinct to offer comfort. And Jacob crawled over, actually crawled, purposeful and determined, to lean against Vanessa's side, one hand reaching toward his father, one staying with the woman who'd taught him it was safe to move. "I'm sorry," Scott whispered, the words directed at everyone and no one. "I'm so sorry. I was so afraid of losing them that I never let them—" "I know." Vanessa's voice carried no judgment, only understanding. "But they're here now. They're walking. They're trying. And that's what matters." Scott nodded, unable to speak. His hand still touching Emma's, his eyes red and raw, and more alive than Vanessa had ever seen them. The sun hung low in the sky, painting everything gold and impossible. And in the space between one breath and the next, something fundamental shifted. Not just in Scott Douglas, but in the fabric of what their fractured family might someday become. The mansion felt different when they returned. Scott couldn't quite identify what had changed. The marble was still marble, the silence still silence, the expensive emptiness still expansive and cold. But something in the quality of the air had shifted, as if the house itself had witnessed what happened in Central Park and was holding its breath, waiting to see what came next. He stood in the foyer, while Vanessa carried the twins upstairs, their small bodies heavy with the exhaustion of a day spent actually living. Emma's hand still clutched blades of grass. Jacob had fallen asleep with his face pressed to Vanessa's shoulder, drool darkening her shirt. Scott's legs felt unsteady. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. They walked. Emma and Jacob walked. The thought looped through his mind like a skipping record. Impossible and irrefutable, witnessed by his own eyes in sunlight that couldn't lie. Maria appeared from the kitchen, her expression careful. "Mr. Douglas, can I get you anything?" "No, thank you, I'm—" Scott looked down at his hands, at the grass stains on his pants, at the physical evidence of having knelt on the ground while his world reorganized itself. "I'm fine." Maria nodded slowly, clearly not believing him, but wise enough not to push. Helen left for the evening. I told her to take tomorrow off as well. Vanessa will handle the night routine. That's fine. Yes, fine. Maria lingered, and Scott could feel her wanting to say something, offer something, bridge the chasm between the man who'd left for Boston yesterday and the one standing broken in his own foyer. Scott, she said finally, using his first name again. What you saw today? Don't. The word came out sharper than intended. Please, I can't. I need to. He didn't finish. Just walked toward his office, closed the door, and stood in the center of the room, trying to remember how to breathe. For 2 hours, Scott sat at his desk doing nothing, not reviewing contracts, not answering emails, not planning or strategizing or maintaining any of the control that had defined his existence for 18 months. Just sitting, staring at the mahogany surface, replaying the moment Emma let go of the stroller and stepped into Vanessa's arms, the certainty in her small face, the determination, the absolute trust that someone would catch her when she fell. Trust Scott hadn't earned, hadn't cultivated, hadn't even tried to deserve. Around 9 p.m., he pulled up the folder on his computer labeled Sarah, the one he hadn't opened since the week after the funeral, when pain had been too fresh and organizing photos had felt like organizing evidence of his own destruction. His finger hovered over the trackpad. Then he opened it. The screen filled with images. Sarah laughing at their wedding. Sarah sleeping in Sunday morning light. Sarah, 8 months pregnant with her hands on her belly and joy radiating from every pixel. Sarah in the hospital room. Hours before the twins were born, tired but incandescent, whispering to the camera, "We're going to be parents. Can you believe it?" Scott couldn't look away, couldn't close the folder, couldn't stop the sob that finally, after 18 months of careful control, tore free from his chest like something with claws. The knock on his office door came at 10:23 p.m., soft, tentative, almost apologetic. Scott wiped his face roughly, clearing his throat. "Yes?" The door opened a few inches. Vanessa stood in the gap, still in her grass-stained clothes, her hair escaping its bun in wild curls. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said quietly. I needed to apologize. For today. For disobeying your explicit instructions and putting you through what I put you through. It was inexcusable." Scott stared at her for a long moment. This woman who'd defied him and broken his rules, and given his children their first steps, and felt something crack open in his chest. "Come in," he heard himself say. "Please." Vanessa entered slowly, closing the door behind her. She didn't sit, just stood with her hands clasped in front of her, every line of her body radiating exhaustion and determination in equal measure. "I know I crossed a line," she continued. "I know you have every right to fire me. And if that's what you need to do, I'll understand. But I need you to know that I would never put Emma and Jacob in danger. I would die before I let anything happen to them. And I'm so sorry I made you think, even for a moment, that they were—" "Stop!" Scott's voice came out rough, scraped raw. "Just stop." Vanessa fell silent, bracing herself. Scott stood slowly, moving to the window that overlooked the garden Sarah had designed 3 years ago. English roses, and lavender and stone benches where they'd planned to watch their children play. "I'm not firing you," he said to the glass, to the reflection of himself that looked like a stranger. "I'm not even angry anymore. He stopped, started again. "I came home today, and they were gone. The nursery was empty. And for about 90 seconds, I experienced every fear I've been running from for 18 months. That something would happen, that I'd lose them, that I'd be left with nothing but photos and silence, and the knowledge that I'd failed to protect the last pieces of Sarah I had left." His reflection blurred. He pressed his palm against the glass. "But then, I found you in the park. And I saw them. I saw my children, walking, laughing, living. And I realized that for 18 months I haven't been protecting them. I've been preserving them. Like specimens, like museum pieces, keeping them perfectly safe and perfectly still and perfectly, completely disconnected from anything that makes life worth living. Vanessa took a small step closer. Mr. Douglas, I blamed them. The words came out in a rush, sudden and unstoppable, like lancing a wound. I blamed Emma and Jacob for taking Sarah away from me. Every time I looked at them, I saw the moment she died. The hemorrhage, the emergency, the doctors saying we did everything we could while I stood there covered in her blood, wondering why the hell they'd save the babies instead of my wife. His breath hitched. Tears tracked down his face, hot and shameful. I couldn't hold them after she died, couldn't look at them. Everyone kept saying, they need you, and you're all they have. And I wanted to scream that they were all I had too, and I hated them for it. Hated my own children for surviving when Sarah didn't. Vanessa moved closer still, her voice gentle as rain. But you don't hate them now. No. Scott turned to face her, his face ravaged and open and more honest than he'd been in a year and a half. No, I don't hate them. I love them so much it terrifies me. And that's worse, somehow. Because if I let myself love them, really love them, not just provide for them, and then something happens, if I lose them too, I won't survive it. I won't. So you kept your distance. I kept my distance. Scott's laugh was broken. I hired people to love them for me. I followed protocols and schedules and Dr. Morrison's recommendations because that felt safer than actually being their father. I convinced myself that money and expertise and proper care were enough, that they didn't need me, that it was better if they didn't need me. But they do need you, Vanessa said softly. They've always needed you. Scott's shoulders shook. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to stop the tears, trying to maintain some shred of the control that had kept him functional for 18 months. It didn't work. The sob came from somewhere deep and primal, a sound he didn't recognize as his own. Then another. Then he was breaking down completely. 18 months of buried grief erupting like a dam collapse. And he couldn't stop it. Couldn't contain it. Couldn't do anything but surrender to the flood. Vanessa was there suddenly. Not touching, but close, her presence solid and grounding. It's okay, she whispered. It's okay to grieve her. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be scared. I can't do this. You're already doing it. You're here. You're feeling. That's all grief asks of us. To be brave enough to feel it. Scott sank into his desk chair, elbows on his knees, face in his hands, and wept for the first time since the hospital. For Sarah. For the 18 months he'd lost with his children. For the father he hadn't known how to be, and the man he was terrified to become. Vanessa knelt beside the chair, not touching, just present, and waited. Patient, certain, giving him space to fall apart without rushing him toward being whole again. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, Scott's breathing steadied. He looked up to find Vanessa watching him with eyes that held no judgment, no pity, just understanding. I don't know how to be what they need, he admitted, voice hoarse. I don't know how to love them the way Sarah would have, the way you do. You don't have to love them like Sarah would have. You're not Sarah. Vanessa's voice was gentle, but firm. And you don't have to love them like I do. You're their father. Your love is supposed to look different. But I don't know what it's supposed to look like. Scott's voice cracked. I don't know how to start. You already started. Today, in the park. Vanessa smiled sadly. You ran toward them when you thought they were in danger. You dropped to your knees when you saw them walk. You let yourself feel how much you love them. That's where it starts, with letting yourself feel. Scott looked at her. This woman from Queens, with no credentials and infinite wisdom, who'd done in 5 weeks what he hadn't managed in 18 months, and felt something shift inside him. Not healing, exactly, but the beginning of it. The first crack in the ice. "I lost Sarah," he said quietly, the words an admission and a question. "How do I stop being afraid I'll lose them too?" Vanessa was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You didn't lose her, Mr. Douglas. She's dead." "She's dead," Vanessa agreed. "But she's not lost. You just forgot where she still lives." Scott frowned. "I don't—" Vanessa pointed toward the computer screen, still displaying the folder of photos. Then she pointed toward the ceiling, toward the nursery on the 3rd floor. "She lives in them," Vanessa said softly, "in Emma's eyes, and Jacob's smile, and every milestone they reach. In the lullabies she wanted to sing, and the stories she wanted to read, and the love she would have given them if she'd lived. Sarah isn't gone, Mr. Douglas. She's just translated, changed into a different form. And the more you love Emma and Jacob, the more of her you'll find." The words hit Scott like a revelation, simple and devastating. He looked at the photo on his desk, Sarah, 30 weeks pregnant, laughing at something off camera, and for the first time in 18 months, looking at it didn't feel like being stabbed. A tear fell on the glass surface, blurring her smile. "She wanted them so much," Scott whispered. "We tried for 3 years. 3 years of treatments and disappointments and almost pregnancies. And when she finally—" His voice broke. "She was so happy. Even in the delivery room, even when things started going wrong, she kept saying, 'Save them. Make sure they're okay. Promise me they'll be okay.' And I promised. I promised her they'd be okay. But I haven't kept that promise. I've kept them alive, but not okay. Not happy. Not—" "You kept your promise the way you knew how," Vanessa interrupted gently. "You kept them safe. But now you know they need more than safety. They need you. The real you. The father who's scared and grieving and imperfect. That's who they need." Scott looked at her through tears. "I don't know how to be that." "Then learn. I'll teach you if you want. Or we'll figure it out together." Vanessa's smile was sad and kind. "But you can't keep hiding, Mr. Douglas. You can't keep running from the nursery and the memories and the fear. Because Emma and Jacob, they're walking now. They're waking up. And they're going to notice sooner or later that their father is the only one who hasn't come back to life." The truth of it settled over Scott like weight, crushing and clarifying at once. He nodded slowly, unable to speak. Vanessa stood, preparing to leave him with his grief and his breakthrough and his computer full of ghosts. But at the door, she paused. "Mr. Douglas, one more thing." "Yes?" "What you said about blaming them. Emma and Jacob will never need to know that. It doesn't serve them. It doesn't help. You were grieving and traumatized and human. But they don't need to carry that." Her eyes held his. "What they need is the father you're becoming, not the one you were." "Okay?" Scott managed a rough nod. Vanessa left, closing the door softly behind her. And Scott sat alone in his office, surrounded by photos of his dead wife and the sound of his own breathing, and let himself feel, really feel, for the first time since the hospital, the grief, the love, the terror, the hope. All of it, crushing and clarifying and absolutely necessary. At 2:17 a.m., Scott found himself standing outside the nursery door again. He'd been doing this for weeks, standing in the hallway, listening, unable to cross the threshold. But tonight, he opened the door. The nightlight cast everything in soft amber. Emma and Jacob slept in their cribs, positioned so they could see each other through the slats, their breathing synchronized in the way of twins. Scott moved between them, barely breathing, terrified of waking them, but more terrified of leaving. He looked at Emma first, Sarah's eyes even closed, so similar it hurt. Her small hand clutched the blanket, grass stains still visible on her palm from the afternoon's adventure. Then Jacob, Sarah's nose, Sarah's delicate bone structure, but his own stubborn chin and serious expression, even in sleep. His children, not Sarah's replacement, not evidence of her death, just themselves. Emma and Jacob. Two separate, miraculous people who'd survived impossible odds and were learning slowly to thrive. "I'm sorry," Scott whispered into the darkness. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I'm so sorry I let fear win for so long." Jacob stirred slightly, making a soft sound in his sleep. Scott's hand moved automatically, settling gently on Jacob's back, feeling the rise and fall of breath. Jacob sighed, settling deeper into sleep, and Scott, carefully, terrified but determined, did something he hadn't done since the twins were born. He pulled the rocking chair close to the cribs and sat, not leaving, not running, just staying, being present in the space where his children slept, where his wife's absence echoed in every carefully chosen decoration, where 18 months of grief had built walls he was finally ready to dismantle. He stayed until dawn painted the windows pink and gold. He stayed until Vanessa found him there, asleep in the chair, his hand still resting on Jacob's crib, his face peaceful in a way she'd never seen. And when the twins woke, Emma first, then Jacob following, and saw their father there, actually there for once, they didn't cry or fuss. They just watched him with quiet curiosity, as if they too were waiting to see what came next. Scott woke to find Vanessa standing in the doorway, backlit by morning sun, a small smile on her face. "Good morning, Mr. Douglas." He sat up slowly, his neck stiff, his body protesting a night in a rocking chair designed for people much smaller. But his heart felt lighter than it had in 18 months. "Good morning." He looked at the twins, both awake now, watching him. I fell asleep." "I see that. I didn't mean to. I came to check on them and—" He stopped, meeting Vanessa's eyes. "I wanted to stay." Vanessa's smile widened. "That's a good place to start." Emma made a sound, her small, wordless vocalization, and reached her arms up. Not toward Vanessa, toward Scott. He froze, his breath catching. "She wants you to hold her," Vanessa said softly. Scott's hands shook as he lifted Emma from her crib. She was warm from sleep, still slightly damp with baby sweat, smelling of lavender and milk and something indefinably sweet. She settled against his chest, her head tucking under his chin, and Scott felt something inside him that had been frozen for 18 months begin, finally, to thaw. "Teach me," he whispered to Vanessa, his voice breaking around the words. "Please, teach me how to love them again." Vanessa's eyes glimmered with unshed tears. "You already know how, Mr. Douglas. You just forgot you knew." Emma yawned against Scott's shirt, her small hand curling around his collar. And Scott Douglas, 35-year-old billionaire, master of control, runner from grief, stood in his children's nursery, holding his daughter, and let himself believe, for the first time, that maybe it wasn't too late. That maybe love wasn't something you lost when someone died. That maybe, just maybe, Sarah had left him the only map he'd ever need. 2 small children who were learning to walk, and a heart finally ready to follow. The piano room had been locked for so long that Vanessa had to ask Maria 3 times for the key. He finally said yes. Maria handed over the small brass key with something like relief in her expression. "I've been trying to get him to open that room for over a year." "He didn't exactly say yes," Vanessa admitted, tucking the key into her pocket. "But he didn't say no either. This morning when I asked, he just nodded." then left for his office, like he couldn't bear to watch me open the door. That's progress for Scott Douglas. Maria squeezed Vanessa's arm gently. Sarah loved that room. Spent hours in there, especially during the pregnancy. She said playing helped with the anxiety. Vanessa thought about that as she climbed the stairs to the second floor, the twins drowsy from their mid-morning bottles, Jacob in her arms, and Emma holding her hand as they navigated the steps together, slowly, carefully, celebrating each small achievement. Playing helped with the anxiety. What else had Sarah left behind in that sealed room? What comfort or wisdom or piece of herself had been locked away because grief had made it too painful to remember? The door opened with a soft click. Afternoon light streamed through tall windows, illuminating a space that looked frozen in time. A Steinway grand piano, its surface dustless. Maria must have been slipping in to clean despite the locked door. Sheet music, still arranged on the music stand. A plush bench with storage underneath. Framed photos on the walls showing Sarah at various recitals and performances. Sarah Douglas née Chen had been a concert pianist before marriage, before the tech world parties where she'd met Scott, before she'd chosen family over Carnegie Hall. The room was a museum of that abandoned dream, preserved perfectly, waiting. Vanessa settled the twins on a thick rug near the piano, surrounding them with cushions. They sat quietly, watching her with the attentive curiosity that had been growing over the past few weeks. Emma's eyes tracked Vanessa's movements. Jacob's head turned toward the piano, as if he could sense its potential for sound. "Your mama played this piano," Vanessa said softly, running her hand along the polished surface. "She made beautiful music here." The piano bench beckoned. Vanessa lifted the lid, expecting to find more sheet music, perhaps Sarah's practice journals. Instead, she found a wooden box, cedar by the smell, hand-carved with delicate flowers along the edges, roses and lavender, the same flowers that grew in Sarah's garden, the kind of box made to hold precious things, protected things, things meant to last. Vanessa lifted it carefully, her heart beating faster, as if she was holding something sacred. Inside, letters, dozens of them, written in elegant script on cream-colored stationery. Baby books, the kind expectant mothers fill out with hopes and dreams and promises. A journal with "For Emma and Jacob" written on the cover. Photographs from the pregnancy. And at the bottom, sheet music, not printed, but handwritten, notes flowing across staff paper in Sarah's careful hand. Vanessa's breath caught. She lifted the first piece of sheet music. At the top, in Sarah's writing, "Lullaby for my loves, when I'm not here to sing it." The date, 3 weeks before Sarah died. Vanessa's hands trembled as she read the lyrics Sarah had written beneath the melody. "Close your eyes, my darlings. Let the stars keep watch tonight. I'm here in every shadow. I'm the moon that gives you light. When you're scared, my darlings, and the dark seems far too deep. Remember, love is endless. It's the promise that I keep. I'll be in the morning in the sun upon your face, in every laugh and wonder, in your father's warm embrace. Close your eyes, my darlings. Let my song be your refrain. Even when you cannot see me, Mama's love will still remain." Tears blurred Vanessa's vision. She pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the prescience of it. Sarah knew. Somehow, she knew she might not survive. And she'd left this, a message in a bottle, a voice from beyond death saying, "I love them. I still love them. Help them remember." Vanessa? Emma's small voice, barely a sound, more breath than word, pulled her back. Vanessa looked at the twins through tears. "Do you want to hear your mama's song?" Neither twin could answer in words, but both of them watched her, waiting, as if some part of them remembered a voice they'd heard before birth, a melody that had been their first lullaby. Vanessa sat at the piano bench, placed the sheet music on the stand, and positioned her fingers on the keys. She wasn't a trained pianist. Had taken lessons as a child until money ran out and priorities shifted, but she could read music well enough. And this melody, Sarah's melody, was simple and haunting, designed to be sung more than performed. Vanessa played the opening notes, gentle, flowing, like water over stones. Then she began to sing, her voice soft and slightly unsteady. "Close your eyes, my darlings. Let the stars keep watch tonight." The room seemed to hold its breath. Emma's head tilted. Jacob's eyes went wide. "I'm here in every shadow. I'm the moon that gives you light." And then, impossible, miraculous, undeniable, Emma made a sound. Not a cry, not a fuss. A hum, soft and tentative, but matching the melody, following the notes Vanessa played. Vanessa's fingers nearly stumbled. She kept playing, kept singing, her voice breaking, "When you're scared, my darlings, and the dark seems far too deep." Jacob joined his sister. Another hum, deeper in pitch, weaving beneath Emma's higher tone. They were harmonizing. These children who'd never spoken, never vocalized beyond cries and occasional giggles. They were singing. Vanessa's tears fell on the piano keys, blurring the ivory and ebony together. She continued through the verse, her voice barely holding together. "Remember, love is endless. It's the promise that I keep." The humming grew stronger, more confident. Emma rocked slightly, her body moving to the rhythm. Jacob's hands patted the carpet in time with the music. They remembered. Somehow, impossibly, they remembered their mother's voice from the womb. The melody she must have played for them during pregnancy. The song that was theirs before they were even born. Vanessa reached the final verse, her voice thick with emotion. "Close your eyes, my darlings. Let my song be your refrain. Even when you cannot see me, Mama's love will still remain." She played the final chord, let it hang in the air, dissipating slowly into silence. The twins stopped humming. They looked at each other, twin to twin, some wordless communication passing between them. And then, both turned toward the doorway. Where Scott Douglas stood, his face wet with tears, one hand pressed to his mouth, his entire body shaking. "That's—" his voice broke. "That's her song. She played it, every night, for months. She'd sit right there and play it and talk to them. Tell them she loved them. Promise them." He couldn't finish. The grief was too large, too immediate. Vanessa stood slowly, moving toward him. "I found it in the bench. A whole box of things she left for them. Letters, lullabies, promises." She knew. Scott's voice was barely audible. She knew she might not make it. The doctors warned her. The pregnancy was high risk. Her blood pressure, the complications. But she refused to terminate. She said, a sob escaped. She said, "They're already loved, Scott. They're already ours. We'll figure out the rest." Vanessa's heart clenched. She sounds like she was extraordinary. She was. Scott looked at the twins, who were still watching him, still humming softly, an echo of the melody, fading but persistent. "She was everything. And I've been so angry at her for leaving, so angry at them for surviving, so angry at God or fate or whatever decided she had to die for them to live. But it wasn't a trade," Vanessa said softly. "It was never a trade. It was just tragedy. Random and terrible and no one's fault." Scott nodded, unable to speak. Emma made the sound again, that soft, melodic hum, and reached her arms toward Scott. He moved automatically, crossing the room, sinking to his knees beside his children. Emma touched his face with her small hand, tracing the path of his tears with curious fingers. "That's her song," Scott whispered again, looking at Vanessa through blurred vision. "She wrote it for them." "No, sir." Vanessa's voice was gentle but certain. She gestured toward Emma and Jacob, still humming fragments of the melody, their voices small but real. "It's their song now." The distinction landed like a benediction. Scott pulled both twins into his arms, awkwardly, still learning how to hold two squirming toddlers at once, and buried his face against Emma's hair, breathing in the scent of her, the reality of her, the undeniable proof that Sarah's love hadn't died with her body. It had just changed form, translated into two small souls who hummed their mother's lullaby and reached for their father and proved, every single day, that love was the one force that survived even death. Over the next 2 weeks, the piano room became their sanctuary. Every afternoon, Vanessa would bring the twins there and play Sarah's lullaby. Sometimes Scott joined them, sitting silently in the corner, watching his children respond to their mother's voice through Vanessa's interpretation. Sometimes he stayed away, the grief still too raw, the presence of Sarah's things too overwhelming. But the twins' voices grew stronger. Emma's hum evolved into sustained notes. Jacob started adding variations, playing with pitch and rhythm in a way that suggested musical instinct. Sarah's gift, passed down through DNA and prenatal memory. And gradually, miraculously, other sounds emerged. Bah! Jacob, pointing at a block. Ma! Emma, reaching for more crackers. Not words yet, but phonemes. The building blocks of language. Intentional sounds designed to communicate wants and needs and thoughts. Dr. Morrison, during her bi-weekly video consultation, watched footage of the twins' progress with visible astonishment. "This is remarkable," she said, replaying the clip of Emma babbling while stacking blocks. 18 months of developmental delay, and now she's not just vocalizing. She's experimenting with sound, testing cause and effect. This level of progress in 3 weeks is impossible, Scott offered quietly. I was going to say miraculous. Dr. Morrison looked at him through the screen. Mr. Douglas, I don't know what's happening in that house, but whatever it is, keep doing it. Scott glanced at Vanessa, who sat just off camera, and felt something warm unfold in his chest. We will, he said. I promise. The breakthrough happened on a rainy Tuesday. Vanessa had the twins in the piano room, playing the lullaby as she did every afternoon. Scott was there too, more present now, less afraid, slowly learning to occupy space in his children's lives without fleeing. Emma sat in Scott's lap, her small body warm and solid. Jacob leaned against Vanessa's side, his fingers exploring the piano keys, producing random plinking notes. Vanessa sang the first verse, her voice stronger now, more confident after 2 weeks of daily practice. Close your eyes, my darlings, let the stars keep watch tonight. Emma's hum joined in, perfect pitch, following the melody exactly. Then Jacob added his deeper tone, harmonizing instinctively. And suddenly, spontaneously, they reached the final line together, all three voices interweaving, Mama's love will still remain. But this time, Emma didn't just hum. She sang. One word, clear and unmistakable and earth-shatteringly beautiful. Mama. Scott went absolutely still. His arms tightened reflexively around Emma, as if she might dissolve if he didn't hold on. Did she... His voice was barely a whisper. Did she just... Emma looked up at him with Sarah's eyes and said it again, testing the word, tasting its shape. Mama. Jacob, not to be outdone, patted Vanessa's arm and echoed his sister. Mama. The twins looked at each other, delighted by this new trick, and said it together. Mama, Mama. Then Emma turned in Scott's lap, placed both small hands on his chest, and added, Dada. The world stopped. Scott's face crumpled. He clutched Emma closer, pressing his face against her hair, his shoulders shaking with sobs he didn't try to contain. Oh, God, he managed, between broken breaths. Oh, God, baby girl. Yes, I'm Dada. I'm here. I'm so sorry I wasn't here before, but I'm here now. I promise I'm here. Jacob crawled across the piano bench to his father, wrapping small arms around Scott's leg, and repeated clearly, "Dada." Vanessa watched through tears, her hands still resting on the piano keys, Sarah's lullaby hanging unfinished in the air. But it didn't need finishing, because the song had accomplished exactly what Sarah intended. It had bridged the space between life and death, between grief and healing, between a mother's love and her children's voices learning to sing it back into the world. Scott looked up at Vanessa, his face ravaged and radiant, and mouthed two words, "Thank you." Vanessa shook her head, tears streaming freely. She gestured to the wooden box still open on the piano, to Sarah's photograph on the wall, to the lullaby that had waited 18 months to be sung. "Not me," she mouthed back. "Her." That evening, after the twins were asleep, Scott returned to the piano room alone. He sat at the bench where Sarah had sat, touched the keys she'd touched, and pulled out the rest of the contents from the wooden box. Letters. So many letters. He opened one at random. "My darling Emma and Jacob. If you're reading this, it means I'm not there to tell you in person how deeply you are loved. Your father will give you this when you're old enough to understand. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm there to embarrass you with how much I saved these letters for nothing. But just in case, you are not accidents. You are not tragedies. You are choices we made out of love, fully knowing the risks. And if something happens to me, I need you to know it was worth it. Every moment of fear, every complication, every doctor's warning, worth it. Because you exist. Because the world gets to have you in it. Be kind, be curious, be brave. Take care of your father. He's stronger than he thinks, but more fragile than he'd ever admit. And remember, love doesn't end when people die. It just changes shape. I'll be in every sunrise you see, every song you sing, every moment you feel safe enough to be exactly who you are. I love you. I loved you before you were born. I'll love you long after I'm gone." Your mama, Sarah Scott, read every letter, all 27 of them, each dated, each addressed to his children's future selves, each a piece of Sarah's heart preserved in ink and hope. By the time he finished, it was past midnight, and his face hurt from crying, and something inside him that had been locked tight for 18 months had finally, completely, broken open. But not broken like shattered. Broken like a dam releasing water that had been held too long, finally flowing toward where it needed to go. Toward healing, toward his children, toward a future that included both Sarah's absence and her unending presence. Toward love, messy, terrifying, absolutely essential love. He gathered the letters carefully, returned them to their box, and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Sarah, for loving them first, for leaving pieces of yourself, for trusting me to figure out how to be enough." He paused, then added, "I'm going to try. I promise. I'm finally going to try." Somewhere in the silence, he could almost hear her voice, or maybe just the memory of it, saying what she'd always said when he doubted himself. "You already are enough, Scott. You just need to believe it." And for the first time since she died, he thought maybe, just maybe, he was starting to. The tower was 7 blocks high when it fell. Jacob had been working on it for 10 minutes, an eternity in toddler time, his small face scrunched in concentration, tongue poking out between his lips in an expression so achingly reminiscent of Sarah that Scott had to look away. They were in the living room on a Saturday morning. The space transformed over the past 3 weeks, from a showpiece into something resembling actual life. Toys scattered across the Persian rug, board books stacked haphazardly on the coffee table, the scent of cinnamon rolls baking in the kitchen, because Vanessa had discovered that Emma loved anything with cinnamon, and Scott, remarkably, impossibly, had offered to help bake them. Scott sat on the floor in jeans and a Harvard t-shirt, Emma tucked against his side, watching Jacob build. Vanessa was in the kitchen, humming while she cleaned up flour and sugar, giving them space while remaining close enough to witness. The tower swayed. Jacob reached for another block, his coordination still developing, still imperfect. The tower toppled. Blocks scattered across the carpet in a rainbow cascade, clattering and rolling. Jacob's face crumpled. His bottom lip trembled, that universal toddler expression that preceded tears and devastation, and the conviction that this small tragedy was the end of all joy. But instead of crying, Jacob looked up, directly at Scott, and said, clear as morning, "Dada." The word hung in the air like something physical, like something Scott could reach out and touch if his hands would only remember how to move. Time seemed to pause. The cinnamon smell from the kitchen, the sunlight through the windows, the soft sound of Vanessa's humming. Everything froze, waiting for Scott to catch up with this impossible moment. "Dada," Jacob said again, more insistent this time. Reaching toward Scott with both hands, seeking comfort for his toppled tower and broken architectural dreams. Scott's throat closed, his vision blurred, his hands trembled as they moved automatically to lift Jacob, to pull his son against his chest, to hold him close while the world reorganized itself around this single, perfect syllable. Scott tried to speak, couldn't, tried again. "I'm here, buddy. I'm here. Dada's here." The name felt foreign in his mouth. Strange and new and terrifyingly right. Dada. Not Mr. Douglas. Not your father spoken by staff and specialists. Just Dada. Simple, essential, the first word his son had chosen to speak into the world. And he'd chosen it for Scott. Emma, not to be outdone by her brother, grabbed Scott's shirt with sticky cinnamon fingers and shouted, voice strong and joyful, "Data!" Something broke in Scott's chest. Not shattered, not destroyed, just opened, cracked wide enough for 18 months of withheld love to finally, catastrophically, flood through. He scooped Emma up with his other arm, gathering both twins against his chest, and sobbed. Great, heaving, uncontrollable sobs that shook his whole body, tears soaking into their soft hair while they patted his face with confused concern. "I'm sorry," he choked out between gasping breaths. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I'm so sorry you had to wait so long for me to be—" He couldn't finish. The grief and joy were too tangled, too overwhelming, too massive to contain in language. Emma kissed his cheek, a wet, sloppy toddler kiss that left drool on his face. Jacob wrapped small arms around Scott's neck and held on, not understanding why Dada was crying, but offering comfort in the only way he knew how. "Dada," Emma repeated, gentler now, as if testing whether the word would make him happy or sad. "Dada, okay?" The question, her first multi-word construction, her first evidence of empathy and emotional awareness, demolished what was left of Scott's composure. "Yes, baby," he managed, pressing kisses to both their heads. "Yes, Dada's okay. Dada's more than okay. Dada loves you. Both of you. So much. More than anything. More than—" His voice broke again. He just held them, rocking slightly, memorizing the weight of them in his arms, the warmth of their small bodies, the miracle of their voices calling him back to life. From the kitchen doorway, Vanessa watched, with tears streaming silently down her face. She pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the scene before her. Scott Douglas, the man who'd avoided his children's nursery for 18 months, now kneeling on his living room floor, holding both twins and crying like his heart was breaking and healing simultaneously. Sometimes, Vanessa thought, the smallest words rebuild the biggest hearts. She didn't interrupt, didn't speak, just bore witness to the moment a father finally came home to his children, and they, generous and forgiving in the way only children can be, welcomed him without question, without resentment, with nothing but uncomplicated love. Dada, Jacob said again, satisfied with the response his word had generated. And Emma, ever the echo of her brother, giggled and repeated, "Dada, dada, dada." They made it a game, shouting the word over and over. Delighted by the sound of it, by their own power to produce language, by the way it made their father hold them tighter each time they said it. Scott laughed through his tears, the sound rusty but genuine, and thought, This is what I've been missing. This is what Sarah meant when she said being a parent was the hardest, most important thing we'd ever do. Not the provision, not the protection, not the careful protocols and expensive interventions. Just this, being present, being called, being needed, and choosing, again and again, to answer. The shift happened gradually, then suddenly. That afternoon, Scott canceled his Monday meetings, then Tuesdays. By Wednesday, Maria was fielding increasingly pointed calls from board members and investors wondering why the CEO was suddenly, inexplicably, unreachable. "Tell them." Scott paused. Emma in his lap, attempting to help him respond to emails by pounding on the keyboard. "Tell them I'm taking personal time. Family matters." "For how long?" Maria asked carefully. Scott looked at Emma's concentrated face, at Jacob across the room playing with Vanessa, at the life happening in rooms that used to be museum pieces. "I don't know. A few weeks, maybe longer." He met Maria's eyes. "The company won't collapse without me. But my children might. And I've made that trade before. I'm not making it again." Maria smiled, relief evident in her expression. "I'll handle it." "I know you will. That's why I pay you obscene amounts of money." "Actually, you pay me obscene amounts of money because I know all your passwords and where the bodies are buried." Also true. After Maria left, Scott sat with Emma's weight warm in his lap and realized he didn't want to go back. Didn't want to return to 16-hour days and international calls and the constant pressure of being Scott Douglas, boy wonder, Wall Street genius. He wanted this. Sticky fingers on his keyboard, the sound of Vanessa singing in the next room, the possibility that at any moment one of his children might say "Dada," and he'd actually be there to hear it. Is this allowed? He wondered. Am I allowed to want this more than empires and mergers? Then Emma said "Dada" again, and he realized it didn't matter what was allowed. It only mattered what was right. By the second week of Scott's personal time, the press had noticed. "Tech billionaire drops off grid," read one headline. "Where is Scott Douglas?" asked another. And then, inevitably, with the casual cruelty of gossip media, sources say Douglas romantically involved with children's nanny. Scott saw the article while scrolling his phone during the twins' nap. A photo, grainy, taken with a long lens, showed him and Vanessa in the garden. She was laughing at something he'd said. His hand rested on her shoulder. They looked, admittedly, like more than employer and employee. The article speculated wildly. Secret affair, inappropriate relationship, the nanny who'd changed the reclusive billionaire, complete with breathless commentary about age gaps and power dynamics and whether this was another Jude Law situation. Scott's first instinct was damage control. Lawyers, cease and desist letters. The full machinery of his considerable resources deployed to crush the story. His second instinct, quieter, but stronger, was to close the phone and forget about it. "You should probably address this," Maria said when he told her about the article. "Before it becomes a narrative you can't control." "Let them speculate." "Scott, I'm serious. Let them write whatever they want. Vanessa and I know the truth. You know the truth. Anyone who matters knows the truth." He looked at Maria steadily. "I'm not going to dignify gossip with a response. And I'm definitely not going to let tabloid speculation interfere with what's happening in this house. People will talk. People always talk. Usually because their own lives are too boring to occupy them. Scott shrugged. Emma said more yesterday, as in, more crackers, please. Her first polite request. That's what matters. Not what some blogger thinks about who I'm sleeping with. Maria studied him for a long moment. You've changed. I know. It's good. The change. You seem happy, Scott supplied. Human, Maria corrected gently. You seem human again. The new rhythm established itself organically. Mornings. Scott made breakfast, while Vanessa got the twins dressed. Often this involved Emma helping by throwing eggs on the floor, and Jacob helping by opening all the cabinets and removing every pot. The kitchen became a disaster zone of flour and spilled milk and laughter. Mid-morning, story time in the library. Scott's reading voice had improved considerably. He'd stopped treating books like quarterly reports and started doing character voices that made the twins giggle. Afternoons, the piano room. Vanessa played Sarah's lullaby while Scott held the twins, all of them humming together, creating harmonies that felt like prayer. Evenings, cooking dinner together, Vanessa teaching Scott how to make things beyond ordering takeout. His knife skills were terrible. He'd never properly sautéed vegetables. But Emma and Jacob didn't care about culinary technique. They just cared that Dada was present, singing off-key while chopping peppers, occasionally abandoning dinner prep to chase them around the kitchen. The mansion filled with sound, with life, with the everyday chaos of family being family. Dr. Morrison, during her weekly consultation, could barely contain her professional amazement. The progress is extraordinary, she said, reviewing recent videos. Emma's vocabulary is exploding. 20 words now, some 2-word combinations. Jacob's gross motor skills have improved dramatically. They're both at or above developmental milestones for their age. She paused. What changed, Mr. Douglas? Scott looked at Vanessa, who stood just off-camera folding laundry, while keeping one eye on the twins playing nearby. I stopped trying to control healing, he said simply, and started participating in it. Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because these children are thriving. After the call ended, Vanessa smiled at him. High praise from Dr. Morrison. She's right, though. They're thriving. Scott watched Emma carefully stack blocks while narrating her own process. Big block, little block, big again. I almost missed this. I almost convinced myself that providing expertise and resources was the same as being their father. But you didn't miss it. You're here now. Because you refused to let me hide. Vanessa set down the laundry, her expression serious. I didn't do this, Mr. Douglas. You did. You chose to change. You chose to show up. That's not my accomplishment. It's yours. Scott. I'm sorry. Call me Scott. You've earned the right to use my first name. You've earned... He stopped, trying to find words for what she'd earned. You've earned everything, Vanessa. You gave me my children back. You gave them their voices. I just loved them. Vanessa interrupted softly. That's all I did. The rest, they were always capable of. You were always capable of. It was always there, waiting. I just unlocked it, Scott finished. Made space for it, Vanessa corrected. There's a difference. Before Scott could respond, Jacob toddled over and grabbed his leg, looking up with serious eyes. Dada, come. Come where, buddy? Jacob pointed toward the living room where Emma was building something elaborate with blocks. Play. It was a command, an invitation, the most important meeting request Scott had received in months. Okay, Scott said, letting Jacob pull him toward his sister. Let's play. And as he settled on the floor between his children, as Emma handed him blocks and narrated architectural plans that made no logical sense but complete emotional sense, as Jacob leaned against his side and said Dada, just because he liked the sound of it. Scott realized he'd been chasing the wrong things for 18 months, maybe longer. Success wasn't measured in quarterly profits, or board approvals, or Forbes headlines. It was measured in this: the weight of a child against your side. The sound of your name spoken with love. The ordinary, extraordinary moments that comprised the only legacy that actually mattered. "Big tower," Emma declared, placing a block precariously on top of a structure that defied physics. "Very big," Scott agreed solemnly. The tower swayed, held. Against all odds, it held. Jacob clapped. "Dada proud?" Scott pulled both twins close, his throat tight with emotion. "Yes, buddy. Dada's very proud. Of both of you. Always." From the doorway, Vanessa watched with quiet satisfaction, a basket of clean laundry forgotten at her feet. She'd seen wealth before, had worked in rich homes, cleaned expensive things, navigated the complicated dynamics of serving people with money. But this was the first time she'd seen wealth transformed into richness, money converted into meaning. Success redefined as presence. The Douglas mansion was finally becoming a home, and the man who'd been hiding in his office for 18 months was finally, beautifully, irrevocably becoming a father. "Vanessa!" Emma called. "Vanessa, see?" "Coming, baby," Vanessa called back, moving to join them, to add her voice to the chorus, to continue bearing witness to this small, miraculous family, learning how to be itself. Outside, the October afternoon faded into evening. Inside, in a mansion that had been silent for too long, the sound of laughter echoed through marble halls. And somewhere, in memory, in spirit, in the melody of a lullaby that still played each afternoon, Sarah Douglas smiled, knowing her children had found their voices, and their father had found his way home. The garden had never looked like this. Sarah had designed it 3 years ago with her characteristic attention to detail. English roses climbing trellises, lavender borders, stone pathways winding through carefully curated perennials. Beautiful, sophisticated, perfect for magazine spreads and garden tours, but sterile, untouchable, more art installation than living space. Today, it was chaos. Balloons in every color bobbed from shepherd's hooks and fence posts. A bounce house, an actual inflatable castle, occupied the south lawn where rare Japanese maples had once been the focal point. Children ran shrieking between hedges, their voices carrying pure, uncomplicated joy. A table sagged under the weight of a 2-tier birthday cake, decorated with elephants and giraffes, plus enough cupcakes to feed a small army. The November afternoon was crisp, but sunny. One of those perfect autumn days that felt like a gift. Fallen leaves crunched underfoot. The air smelled of apple cider and birthday cake and possibility. Scott stood on the terrace, surveying the beautiful disaster his home had become, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years. Contentment. "You're smiling," Maria observed, appearing at his elbow with a glass of champagne. "It's unnerving. I'm not sure I recognize you without the permanent stress furrow between your eyebrows." "I'm not stressed. I can see that. It's weird." Scott laughed, easy and genuine. "Sorry to disturb your worldview." "Oh, I'll adjust. It's just going to take some recalibration." Maria clinked her glass against his. "Happy birthday to Emma and Jacob. 2 years old. Can you believe it?" "No," Scott admitted quietly. "Some days I still can't believe they're here, that I'm here, that we actually—" He stopped, his throat tightening. "That you survived," Maria finished gently. "That we became a family," Scott corrected. Down on the lawn, Emma and Jacob toddled after a slightly older child, their coordination still imperfect, but their determination absolute. They were dressed in matching outfits, maroon again, Vanessa's favorite color on them, with 2 embroidered on their chests in gold thread. Vanessa followed a few steps behind, not hovering but present, her attention divided between the twins and a conversation with Helen, the former day nurse who'd been invited despite her initial disapproval of Vanessa's methods. "She fits," Maria said, following Scott's gaze. "With your family. She fits in a way those other nannies never did." "She's not a nanny," Scott said automatically. "I know. I'm not sure what she is, actually. Nanny doesn't cover it. Neither does caregiver or employee or family," Scott supplied quietly. "She's family." Maria studied him for a long moment. "The tabloids are still speculating, you know, about you two. Let them. People talk. They say you're... I don't care what they say." Scott's voice was firm, but not defensive. "Vanessa and I aren't... It's not like that. It's..." He struggled for words to describe what they'd built together. "We're raising my children. Together. We're creating something that doesn't fit conventional categories, and I'm fine with that. More than fine." "You're co-parenting." "Yes." "Exactly." Scott felt relief at the term. She's as much their mother as anyone who isn't Sarah could be. And I'm grateful. Every single day, I'm grateful that she walked into this house and refused to let us stay broken." On the lawn, Jacob fell, a spectacular tumble over his own feet. Before Scott could even tense, Vanessa was there, scooping him up, checking for damage, kissing the scraped knee, and making it better with the alchemy of attention and love. Jacob's tears lasted approximately 5 seconds before he wriggled free and ran off again. Crisis forgotten. "She's good at that," Maria observed. "She's good at everything," Scott replied. "At least, everything that matters." By 3 p.m., the party was in full swing. The guest list was small, intentionally so. Maria and her husband, Helen and her partner, Dr. Morrison, who'd driven from Connecticut for the occasion, eager to see her miracle patients in person, a few of Scott's closest executives and their families, the chef, who'd worked for the Douglases for 5 years and had cried the first time he'd heard the twins say, "Cookie." No press, no society photographers, no one who'd come because Scott Douglas was rich or famous or influential. Just people who'd witnessed the journey, who'd celebrated the small victories, who understood that this party was about more than a birthday. It was about survival, resurrection, a family learning how to be itself. Scott stood near the cake table, watching Emma attempt to teach a 3-year-old the proper way to stack blocks, with limited success and much frustration. Jacob had found a stick and was using it to conduct an imaginary orchestra, humming Sarah's lullaby while marching in circles. "They're extraordinary," Dr. Morrison said, materializing beside Scott with the stealth of someone who'd spent years observing children without disturbing them. "I've been watching them for an hour. The language use, the social engagement, the emotional regulation. This is not the same 2 children I assessed 7 months ago." "No," Scott agreed. "They're not." "You want to know something fascinating? In my entire career, 32 years of pediatric developmental psychology, I've never seen a case quite like this. The speed of their progress, the completeness of their recovery." Dr. Morrison shook her head, wonder in her voice. "Technically, they should still be significantly delayed. Birth trauma, maternal loss, the first 18 months of inadequate stimulation, those factors should have created permanent deficits." Scott's chest tightened at the indirect indictment. "But they didn't," Dr. Morrison continued, "because someone, several someones, but primarily Ms. Patel, created an environment where healing was possible, where love was the primary therapeutic intervention." She looked at Scott directly. "I'm going to write a paper about this case. With your permission, of course, and with all identifying details changed. Because what happened here, it's proof of something we in the field talk about but rarely document. That attachment and presence can accomplish what no amount of professional intervention can achieve alone." "It wasn't just Vanessa," Scott said quietly. "I was part of the problem. You were grieving and traumatized. and doing the best you could with the tools you had. Dr. Morrison's voice was kind, but firm. What matters is that you changed. You let yourself be changed. That's not a small thing, Mr. Douglas. Most people in your position would have stayed defended, stayed distant, and blamed the children when they didn't magically improve. You didn't. You opened yourself to a different way. That takes courage. Scott didn't feel courageous. He felt lucky. Lucky that Vanessa had walked through his door. Lucky that Maria had insisted he interview her. Lucky that his children had been patient enough to wait for him to find his way back to them. I almost missed it, he admitted. All of this. I was so convinced that grief was the only thing I had left of Sarah that I held on to it instead of them. But you didn't miss it. You're here now. Dr. Morrison smiled. And that's what children need. Not perfect parents, but present ones. Ones who show up, who try, who love them despite fear and pain and uncertainty. Dada! Emma's voice cut across the lawn. Dada, come! Scott excused himself and crossed to where Emma stood imperiously pointing at her block structure, which had grown considerably more elaborate with the help of her young collaborator. What do you think? Scott asked seriously, crouching beside her. Is it structurally sound? Emma considered this, her small face thoughtful. Big, she declared. Very big tower. Very big, Scott agreed. Jacob abandoned his conducting to join them, stick still in hand. Dada help? Always, buddy. What do you need? Instead of answering, Jacob simply leaned against Scott's side, casual, easy, the kind of unconscious affection that spoke of complete security. And Scott, who'd spent 18 months afraid to touch his children, wrapped his arm around his son and held on, memorizing this moment, this feeling, this proof that love could survive even the darkest grief. At 4 p.m., they gathered for cake. Scott carried Emma. Vanessa held Jacob. They stood together in front of the elephant-adorned masterpiece while everyone sang Happy Birthday, slightly off-key and completely sincere. The twins' faces glowed in the light of 2 candles, number-shaped because regular candles seemed too abstract for toddlers. Emma bounced in Scott's arms, excited but not quite understanding. Jacob stared at the flames with scientific interest. Make a wish, Vanessa prompted softly. Wish, Emma repeated enthusiastically. Scott looked at his children, healthy, thriving here, and thought about what he'd wish for if wishes worked that way. More time, more moments like this, more ordinary afternoons that felt extraordinary, simply because everyone he loved was present and safe and choosing to stay. But those weren't wishes. Those were commitments, choices he'd make every day for the rest of his life. Help them blow out the candles, Vanessa suggested. Scott leaned close to Emma's ear. Ready? Big breath. 1, 2, 3, blow. Emma puffed air in the general direction of the cake. Jacob followed his sister's lead, his attempt more dramatic but equally ineffective at extinguishing flames. Scott and Vanessa blew gently, helping, and the candles went out to enthusiastic applause. Speech, Maria called from the crowd. Scott Douglas, you're not getting out of this without a speech. Scott's first instinct was to deflect, to make a joke, to avoid the vulnerability of public emotional expression. His second instinct, stronger now, more practiced, was to be honest. He shifted Emma to his hip and raised his glass of sparkling cider. Champagne felt inappropriate when children were present. 2 years ago today, Scott began, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet garden. Emma and Jacob were born, and in the same moment, I lost the most important person in my life, my wife, their mother, Sarah. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable with the darkness of his opening. For 18 months after that, I was... Scott paused, choosing words carefully. Not really here, physically present, but emotionally absent. Convinced that keeping my children safe meant keeping them at a distance. Convinced that if I didn't let myself love them too much, it wouldn't destroy me, when I inevitably lost them too. Vanessa's eyes glistened with tears, but she didn't interrupt. I hired 5 nannies in 14 months. Each one lasted a few weeks before deciding my children were too delayed, too damaged, too difficult. And Scott's voice caught. I almost believed them. Almost convinced myself that Emma and Jacob's silence was permanent. That the best I could do was provide excellent care while they existed in their own unreachable world. He looked at Vanessa, then back at his children. Then, Vanessa Patel walked through my door and said something that changed everything. These children aren't broken. They're just waiting for someone to show them it's safe to come back. Scott's throat tightened. And she was right. They weren't broken. I was, and He had to stop, overwhelmed. She didn't just heal my children. She taught me that miracles aren't bought with money or credentials or expertise. They're nurtured with patience, with presence, with love given freely, without expectation of return. Several people were crying openly now. Dr. Morrison dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. So, this toast, Scott raised his glass higher, isn't just to Emma and Jacob, though I'm grateful every day for their lives. It's to Vanessa, the woman who refused to let us stay broken, who loved my children when I was too afraid to, who reminded me that family isn't about who's hired. He paused, letting the words settle. It's about who stays. The crowd erupted in applause. Vanessa covered her face with her free hand, shoulders shaking. To Vanessa! Someone called. To Vanessa! The crowd echoed. Scott met Vanessa's eyes across the small space between them and mouthed 2 words. Thank you. She shook her head, tears streaming freely, and mouthed back, You did this. Then Emma, impatient with the adult emotion and desperate for cake, shouted at the top of her lungs, Mama! The word rang across the garden, clear and joyful and absolutely certain. Jacob, never one to be outdone, echoed his sister, Mama! Cake! Mama! They were looking at Vanessa. The crowd went silent, unsure how to react, aware suddenly of the complexity. This wasn't their mother, not biologically, not legally, but clearly, functionally, emotionally. Scott smiled. Tears tracked down his face, but his smile was genuine and uncomplicated. She's right, he said softly, speaking to Vanessa but loud enough for everyone to hear. You are their mama, in every way that matters. Sarah gave them life. But you gave them the ability to live it. Vanessa clutched Jacob closer, her face crumpling with emotion. Scott. It's okay, he said gently. It's more than okay. It's perfect. And because children are wonderfully, brutally honest about what they need. Emma said again, insistent, demanding, completely certain. Mama, want cake? The crowd laughed, tension breaking, and the moment passed from sacred to silly, from profound to practical, in the way of all family gatherings. But something had shifted, been named, made real. The Douglas family, unconventional, unexpected, absolutely real, had just defined itself, not through blood or marriage or legal documents, but through choosing, through staying, through love given and received until the labels stopped mattering and only the connection remained. By 7 p.m., the party had wound down. The last guest departed with goodie bags and promises to visit soon. The catering staff packed up the remnants of cake and cleared empty cups. The bounce house deflated slowly, becoming a colorful puddle on the lawn that would be collected tomorrow. Scott and Vanessa gave the twins their bath together, a nightly ritual that had evolved over months. Emma liked bubbles. Jacob liked boats. Both liked splashing water on unsuspecting adults. Big day, Vanessa said, toweling off Jacob while Scott wrestled Emma into pajamas. The biggest. They'll remember this, you know. Maybe not consciously, but emotionally. They'll remember being celebrated, Being loved, being the center of a world that chose them. Scott looked at her, this woman who'd saved his family and refused to take credit for it, and felt overwhelming gratitude. "Vanessa, don't," she interrupted gently. "Don't thank me again. We're past that. She paused, searching for words. "We're just family now, okay?" "Okay." After pajamas came story time. Scott read while Vanessa sat cross-legged on the floor, both twins in her lap. They'd moved beyond simple picture books to slightly longer stories now, the twins' attention spans growing along with their vocabulary. Then, the piano room, the final ritual. Vanessa played Sarah's lullaby, their lullaby now, transformed from grief to grace. The twins hummed along, their voices small but true. Scott held them close, all four of them creating harmony together. "Close your eyes, my darlings. Let the stars keep watch tonight. I'm here, in every shadow. I'm the moon that gives you light." Emma's eyes drooped. Jacob yawned hugely. "When you're scared, my darlings, and the dark seems far too deep, remember love is endless. It's the promise that I keep." They carried the twins to bed together. Emma in Scott's arms, Jacob in Vanessa's. The cribs that had once seemed like cages now just looked like what they were. Safe spaces for children who knew they'd be there when morning came. "Love you," Emma murmured, already half asleep. "Love you too, baby girl," Scott whispered, tucking her blanket around her. Jacob was already out, breathing deeply, one small hand clutching his stuffed elephant. Scott and Vanessa stood between the cribs. Watching them sleep, two people who'd built something neither of them had expected, but both had needed. "Sometimes," Scott said quietly, "I wake up afraid this isn't real. That I'll blink, and it'll be 18 months ago, and I'll still be locked in my office pretending grief is the same as love." "But it is real," Vanessa replied. "This is real. You made it real by choosing to stay, by choosing to try." "We made it real," Scott corrected. "We made it real," Vanessa agreed. They left the nursery together, door cracked to let in hallway light, monitor on so they'd hear if the twins needed them. The mansion around them hummed with life, so different from the museum it had been. Toys in the hallway. Children's laughter echoing in memory through marble halls. The piano room unlocked and used. Sarah's garden is filled with bounce houses and birthday cake. A home. Finally, impossibly, a home. Somewhere in the quiet house, Sarah's photograph smiled from its frame. Somewhere in memory and love and the melody of a lullaby, she witnessed what her family had become. Not what she'd planned, not what she'd expected, but whole. Healing. Choosing love despite fear, despite loss, despite every reason to stay defended and distant. Her children had found their voices. Her husband had found his way home. And the woman who'd made it possible, Vanessa, with her quiet certainty and unshakable faith, had found a family that chose her back. "Family isn't about who's hired," Sarah's letters had said. "It's about who stays." And they had all stayed. Through grief and breakthrough, through silence and first words, through the long journey from broken to whole, they had stayed. In the nursery, Emma stirred in her sleep and murmured, "Mama." Down the hall, in the piano room that was no longer locked, Vanessa played the lullaby one more time, soft and distant, more memory than music. And Scott, standing at his office window looking out at the garden where his children had celebrated their second birthday, smiled. Because miracles, he'd learned, don't happen in hospitals, or laboratories, or boardrooms. They happen in hearts brave enough to love again, in fathers who choose to stay, in children who choose to forgive, in strangers who become family because family was always just a choice, the most important choice, waiting to be made. Close your eyes, my darlings. Let my song be your refrain. Even when you cannot see me, Mama's love will still remain, And somewhere, in the space between memory and promise, between grief and joy, between what was lost and what was found, love remained. Always. Sometimes the greatest miracles happen not in hospitals or labs, but in hearts brave enough to love again.